All right. Greetings, everyone. This is Light of Tabor. I'm your host, Mark Rattel, and today we have a very special guest. Today we have Robert John Hammond, and John is an author, a documentary filmmaker, and a fellow Orthodox Christian. Thank you so much for being here today with us, John.
Good to see you. Thanks. Nice seeing you again. And welcome to everybody who's watching.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. We usually start the interview with like a pretty simple question, which is basically, did you grow up in a Christian household, and what was your childhood like? What did that look like for you?
Okay. You say simple question. Okay.
Right?
Oh, this one little answer here. Yes. To it was okay.
Right?
The
No, it
real
can
thing.
it can actually that can take a lot of different directions depending on where your childhood is, especially since considering the conversations I've had at Agape with people just based off that question, or even just how did you come to Orthodoxy? That it can open up a whole can of worms, or you never know, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I love the question. I actually did there's a thing called a website called Journey to Orthodoxy. I think it's .com. And I
Cool.
remember meeting the priest there, Father John. I can't remember his first last name, but anyway, years ago when I was looking into Orthodox. So the answer to the first question is I grew up in a what I would call a Christian home, because my parents, were Christian, but not, not wasn't like a major discussion point. But we did, and I did get, you know, baptized in we went to a church called, and it was literally called First Christian Church was the name of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that was interesting because, growing up, we were in a military family. My father was a military officer, and he had was finishing up actually medical school. He's a doctor. He retired now.
Okay.
But that was our, background was growing up, moving around a few times. I was born in like Virginia. My parents were at a college there. My dad was in ROTC, and so I grew up, both my mother's brothers, my father's brothers are in, and my father himself, all like military officers. I have one that was like worked at the Pentagon and all kinds of other things. And so, kind of grew up in that environment. We lived in Washington, we lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. My father was in medical school there. And then we were in LA, he's at UCLA and back and forth a little bit. And then, we moved around, military families. And
Yeah.
anyone, it was in one generally didn't like stay in one place for more than a year or two. And then we ended up in Fort Lewis, Washington, which is over near Seattle, and school there. And then we moved again to California, and then my dad started opening his practice, and that was in Santa Maria, California. If you know where that is, Santa Maria, California.
I've heard of it. I've never been there personally.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city. I mean, it's a town, a small, very small town. So I grew up kind of in that environment. So I was like, 7, 8 years old there. And that was where, I mentioned, got baptized into that church. That was a church, and they welcomed, my dad was a doctor at the time. He had his own private practice. And so, that was a quote typical kind of small town growing up, back and we're, I'm old school, literally, in the
Right.
sense that, I mean, I had one of my first, and this will kind of blow your audience mind in some ways. I mean, when I grew up in DC, President Kennedy was inaugurated as president
Wow.
while I was living there. And I remember my dad
Okay.
even going to the inauguration. And I remember, and again, I mean, like a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old. So I don't remember, details of it, but I know that was the case. I do remember that. And, and then when I was born, Eisenhower was the president.
Oh,
So I mean,
wow.
that's I'm gonna quote the boomers and everybody. That's when I see people. Okay, so as far as in that era, because we were born
Right.
after, the baby boomer era is like from 19 after the war, 45 to like 64, and so I grew up
Right.
in, I was in the middle of that period, and grew up in that area. And I know it's funny too because we were just having like technical issues there earlier.
Yeah,
It's
no,
like,
I'm
that's
I'm
what
a
we
bit
call
of a
boomer tech.
I'm a bit of a boomer tech guy myself.
And
I'm
it's so funny.
technically a millennial, but technology
Oh, I
wise, I
know.
fall into the boomer category.
Right, and one of the things I think is like so hilarious about that. We all joke about it, myself included. boomer this, boomer that, like it's kind of like that sort of oh, that means the person doesn't know anything or this or that. And it's like funny because like, Steve Jobs, who invented the iPhone and Apple, he's a boomer. I mean, we
Right,
actually
right.
almost share the same birthday, me and him. And so it's like we're all
True.
talking using boomer technology.
Right.
And
That's it.
we invented, Bitcoin and all the other stuff that people use all the time. So it's not a question that, that generation was like totally ignorant, but at the same time, things have changed so much. And so that's been my
Right.
experience too. So I grew up in literally the 60s. And so I went through that whole period. So even though I was baptized, in the church, and the church we went to, I mean, I sang with the choir in the church. I was a
Nice.
Boy Scout. My dad was in the military, so I was like, oh yeah, Army guys. I want to be. We all want. Kids want to be Army man. We used to live on the Fort Lewis in Washington. So, we'd go across the street, pick, find bullet shells and have all
Oh
our
wow.
little Army hats and uniforms and stuff. That
That's
was kind of
cool.
the background, just thinking, the basic message that we all kind of got. And, back in those days too, you didn't have like a lot of media, so I mean, you literally just go out and play, your bikes, and you'd go out and hike and run around and do a lot of actual, you know, just interactions with kids.
Yeah.
That was kind of
Yeah, I
our
think
life.
I was blessed to, I feel like, get I was like, I think, part of the last generation that had that. Growing up, I was born in 87. I
Mm.
mean, there was no cell phones. It was just, I was skateboarding all day from like
Oh yeah,
9
yeah.
a.m. to like 7 p.m., just outdoors, just, I mean, running wild, but it was a
That's
different time. It was a different
yeah,
time. It really was. It was like, I see that one meme, and it's like, we never knew that we were like the last generation to grow up
yeah.
without cell phones. Like, kind of what we had,
Right.
we didn't really know it until it's
You
gone, and
drink out of the water hose. It's
yeah, drink out of the water hose. It tasted good back then, I don't know,
yeah,
unless it
back
was
then.
like too hot and it was sitting in there
Maybe.
for a while, then maybe
Oh yeah.
not.
But yeah, speaking of skateboards, it's funny too because I don't say that I remember them being invented per se, but I remember we used to actually like take a literal board, like an actual
like
not
a
not
like a
quite a
two
two
by
by
four or something, right?
kind
Yeah.
of a two by four, but a little thinner and
Yeah,
wider.
exactly.
And we literally take like a roller skate, those metal ones, the old ones that they had like a thing that would pull it apart so you could actually have the back and the front of it, and literally
Right.
like nail those onto the bottom of a board, and that was our first skateboards. And then obviously
Yeah.
you could buy these really cheap ones for back then. I was gonna say back in my day, you could get like a skateboard for like $10 or something. And then obviously they came up with the more and more fancy ones. And I had friends who were like surfers. I tried it a couple times. I didn't get into, I didn't become a surfer, but different cliques, some groups of people. This I'm talking now by like high school. So like I said,
Yeah.
the answer to your initial question, growing up, that was kind of my environment is it became like, by the time I was in high school, it was like we're talking summer of love,
Right.
late
Right. So that's it.
60s, 70s.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was like, how did you end up getting into, like, I think you mentioned Buddhism and New Age spirituality, that you went through a stint
Hmm.
of that in your book. How did you end up getting into that? How did you end up delving into those forms of
Yeah.
spirituality?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, but like I said, that realm was the music, I mean, I grew up with like the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, the
Right.
Stones, Led Zeppelin, those are kind of my growing up, influences.
Right, right.
And
Was the Summer of Love, was it in 1968? Was it
yeah,
1968?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that, I mean, so you grew up in like I mean, it was huge. It was a huge
Yeah, and I
part of
actually
like your
remember going to
generation.
Haight-Ashbury. Haight-Ashbury was like the center in San Francisco where all that was. And even as our family, we actually took a vacation up there, and we actually drove through there and like, oh, look at these hippies, long-haired,
Yeah.
freaks or whatever. And it was
Right.
fun, as a kid. I was like I don't know, I was maybe right before I got into high school. Was that around that age when that was we're talking about? Because I actually got in high school like right after that. So that was kind of the thing. People, different styles of clothes and hair. As it changes from like decade to decade. People
Yeah.
have these different. So we had like the fringe jackets, the beetle, boots, and all the bell bottoms and all those kind of things, flowery and all these weird, different, people had like tie dye, I don't know if you know any of
Yeah.
the stuff I'm
Oh
even
yeah,
talking about.
totally,
It's
totally, totally. Yeah,
so
no,
that
I was
was
big into I was big when I was younger. I was big into that era, like the late
Mm,
60s and a lot of
mm.
psychedelic rock music and
Oh yeah,
White
the
Rabbit and Jefferson
Doors.
Airplane and
Oh,
like the
Jefferson
Doors and all.
Airplane,
Yeah,
Blind
no,
Faith.
I was really into that kind of stuff
Oh
for a
yeah.
long time in my youth, just kind of because I was experimenting with drugs. I was experimenting with
Hmm.
cannabis and just kind of all kinds of things that led me down different paths, and that was a big part of my teenage just coming of age,
Yeah, and that was me too. And that's kind of what happened me, I was in that era, where it was just kind of like love, peace, and then you've
Right,
got like, the Timothy Learys in the background and people like that. And not really knowing, I mean, I remember when I remember actually seeing Timothy Leary, on TV. He was the one that he
right.
was like a Harvard professor, and he evidently, I know now, I know a lot more now looking
Hmm.
back. And
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
even my first year in high school, I took what's called social protest literature. It was one of my first classes,
Interesting.
and actually got to, you got to choose the books you wanted to read. And I read like 1984
Mm. George Orwell, yeah.
before the actual year of 1984. So I mean, when I
Oh,
read,
wow. That's
and there was
interesting.
like, yeah, exactly. And there was movies. There was a movie, a couple of versions of the movie about it, which I've seen. I don't know if you've seen any of those or read the
I
book.
have one on VHS. I have one on VHS and I have a couple versions of the book in storage right now. But yeah, I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
So that was actually an early influence for me. That Animal Farm,
Hmm.
George Orwell, a lot of that
Another good
stuff.
one.
Yeah, it really got me. I was kind of, read like some conspiracy theory books. None dare call it conspiracy, I think, back in those days too. So I was
Yeah,
pretty open to different things. I mean, I grew up really, I'd say my favorite genre was more like science fiction and,
nice.
that type of stuff. And so it's like,
Yeah.
you actually represented me perfectly because you had boomers watching the moon landing.
Oh, Lord have mercy. I was having a little fun there. Lord have mercy
That
on you.
was totally.
It was a little silly.
I was a total like a NASA fanboy and all that. As a kid, it's like you grow up when that's all you know, and we literally didn't
Yeah,
have like a thousand things where you could research. Hey, wait a minute, did that really happen? Let me check out those
right.
shadows again. It's like, wait a
It's
minute, how'd they get
interesting.
on a landline from the moon to the President Nixon? Oh, I hear
It's
you loud and clear.
it's wild, it's just I try to
Anyways,
use sometimes I try to use humor to try to like, you know, help people maybe break out of the kind of, or just to think, maybe just to critically think for a minute,
mhm,
just to kind of like maybe just to reevaluate a memory from a new perspective of like, and I think
right.
humor is a powerful tool to kind of like shake people up a little bit out of that bubble sometimes, it takes different tools for
Yeah.
different people, but I don't know, humor's powerful. I
Yeah, it
think
really
so.
is. Humor's
Yeah.
powerful, music's powerful,
Yeah, it
film and
is.
television are powerful, and the media in general, and just the influence of friends and reading books and so forth. So that's for me. I read a lot of different kinds of books, including some like things on like Eastern religions at the time. Alan Watts was actually
Yeah.
popular back
Which
then. He actually had a
didn't
television show.
right, Father Seraphim Rose
Seraphim.
studied under him. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so a lot of
Yeah.
the stuff when I look back and I finally learned about Father Seraphim Rose, Saint Seraphim Rose, I would probably say,
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
totally. 100%.
I did not, know, obviously like we all do, I kind of like to say it, right now, I'm not young enough to know everything.
Right. Lord have
You
mercy.
know, so it's like you learn that how much you don't know.
Yeah.
You think,
Yeah.
you hear something, and back then, it was like,
Yeah.
we had like Walter Cronkite, and here's the news, and you get everything kind of really spoon fed to you from like two or three networks, ABC,
Yeah.
NBC, CBS, and that was
Right.
it. And you had like PBS, for like a little history stuff, or some, whatever documentaries.
Yeah.
But not, we weren't really sitting there, you watch TV, a lot, but it wasn't like, obviously we didn't have the internet, didn't have cell phones, didn't really, sit and watch a lot of stuff. And so, I'd read a lot of books. So I was a very much
Nice.
a bookworm kind of a kid. And, I like
Awesome.
music and, like I said, the kind that I was talking about, a lot of, like I said, the Doors and
Right.
Yes and, Moody Blues and, kind of really kind of,
Nice.
very well done music,
Yeah.
rock and then we had Motown too. So it was like, you know, black culture, I went to black college for a while. And so I
Yeah.
tried, and that was kind of like trying to fit into different realms too, because every little clique of people we identify, sometimes with, like we're this type of person, and you
Yeah.
walk through high school, you stand on different corners.
Oh
It's like,
yeah.
okay, yeah, we're like the dopers over here, we're the
Yeah. Got the
skaters over
potheads over
here,
here. You got
the
the yeah.
yeah, the
You
surfers,
got the
the
jocks.
socials. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that was interesting. And I was pretty much good with all the different groups of people as far as, I got along with them all. We weren't like into, I wasn't into like, oh, we're, the only cool ones. But,
Right.
I try to be like kind of, the quote cool kids table, as they say.
Right.
And you try to, I mean, and that's one of the things with moving around a lot, just,
Mm. For,
personality wise,
yeah.
for me at least, it can go different ways. For me,
Mm.
I was kind of smart, I thought, as far as be able to do well in school. So I tried to like,
Yeah.
be impressive and, oh, I can get straight A's or whatever. But at the same time, I wanted to just kind of fit in too.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
Right. Because
the social
if you're too
groups,
academic, that could be bad for the social standings.
fire,
Right. And certain.
yeah.
Right. 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 Yeah. Totally.
And it's almost, yeah, and it's unfortunate in a lot of communities.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like
Yeah.
degrading, to, oh, this guy's a bookworm. Whoa, nerd. Like it's a downplayed thing in some groups,
Yeah, no,
or
totally.
doing your
In a lot of
homework.
groups, in a lot of popular groups or whatever you want
Yeah,
to
it's
call, you know what I mean?
unfortunate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I kind of had to walk that line, and because I really felt like, oh, I really, I mean, my dad was a doctor, and most of our relatives, my mother, had a master's degree. Well, she actually went back and finished that, but she, worked for like Department of Social Services and she was a teacher, college counselor, and so I had, that positive environment. So we were always
Right.
encouraged, to do that. And then I graduated high school early, went
Nice.
to college. First I was like studying political science, and then changed over the years. I ended up eventually, I mean, it took me a long time because I finally got, I had so many other issues that I
Yeah.
ended up joining the military myself, because I was kind of in the back of my mind of, oh, I should do that, be like my dad.
Right.
And, but then I was also like growing up in the 60s, I was like anti-war, anti-Vietnam, the draft age was like 21, and no, the draft age was 18, but you couldn't vote till
Right.
you're 21. And I was like,
Right.
man, this is,
Yeah.
down
Right.
with
You
the
can
man, that stuff.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I read a lot of like I said, social protest types of things, and like I said, you kind of get influenced by these various movements, that at the
Yeah.
time I thought, yeah, these are, good causes, let's be against the war, what are we fighting for, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And and then there was like the Black Panthers, there was all these
Mm-hmm.
other, movements, different hippies and, all kinds of groups, and I didn't really
Yeah.
know a lot about the background of most of them. I didn't know, anything about MK Ultra or any of
Right.
these things at the time. I think I
Well, because
started,
you're in
I
the
mean, I
heat
knew
of it.
about
You're
this,
in the midst of it. Yeah. In the heat of the
right.
moment there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. You grow up wherever you grow up, and you're influenced by the influences you have. And I'm not,
Yeah.
and it's easy to joke around with all these guys from that era. They're all blah 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 blah,
Right.
etc. But
Right.
every generation has really bad influences, and
100%. There's a ton
there's
of
not any like one
yeah.
group, whether it's people identified by their skin color, by their ethnicity. Oh, we're Irish, so we're like this, or we're
Right.
black, so we're like this, and it's like people are actual people,
Yeah.
humans, and we all have plus minuses,
a hundred
and we all
percent.
have influences, and
Yeah.
whether it's through our educational system, which, like I said, you can look back and think, I really kind of got brainwashed about this or about that or about this. And so, like you talk about, watching the moon landing and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, I wanted to be an astronaut, or yeah, I wanted to either be an astronaut or like I love James Bond, so I either want to be a spy, I mean, those are like
Right.
the two coolest jobs, that I thought I could do. And
Maybe put them
obviously I
both
didn't.
together, be like a galactic spy. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right. Yeah, spy for the Empire. Yeah. But then
That'd be
one of the
pretty.
things actually, what's actually crazy is I used to think all these different, things. Oh, I'd be this, or maybe I'd be an army general, or the blah blah blah. Just kids have their creative
Yeah. I
fantasies.
wanted to be a
You read
ninja.
comic books. Oh, of course, yeah, you read comic
Right.
books, and oh yeah, I'd like to have superpowers. And
Yeah.
one day I actually realized, and this is kind of like the seed planet to where I am now. I actually had the thought, you know what, I could actually do all these things. I would read so many books. I said, you know, if I was a writer, I could just
Yeah.
create these worlds. I could live these lives. You know, like I could be like, you know, Ian Fleming, write these spy novels. I could write,
Yeah.
you know, space trilogies. You know, Arthur C. Clarke or some of these, you know,
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov. Those types of, you know, Ray Bradbury, Robert
Oh
Heinlein. You know,
yeah.
those are some of the science fiction,
So
you know,
good.
that I used to grow up with, or I did
Hmm.
grow up with. And you know, and I loved, you know, the movies. So I thought, man, you know, that would be a way I could really live all these different lives. You know, I could just, you know, be
Yeah.
creative. So that
That's a
was kind of where I,
powerful concept, powerful idea
yeah.
to come into. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's because it's very true, man. You can just create these worlds with your words. If you have this way with words are so powerful. If you put the right words together in the right sentence with the right person, your whole life can change. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know if people
absolutely.
understand the power of words. Like I've always kind of had this somewhat of an understanding of it. My dad was an English teacher, and it's just I've
Mm,
and he'd always put the emphasis of math and English, but more so even English, because like you need to be able to, if you have an issue with something, you have to be able to write and articulate your words well in a letter. Like how much that's such a powerful tool to have. Like it's so
oh,
essential.
absolutely. And what's
You
cool
know?
too is not just like learning, you know, grammar and
Oh
sentence
yeah.
structure, which
Oh, it
it
goes way
has a place,
beyond that.
obviously.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's like, you know, like I know, like you do like a lot of like freestyle, and that to
I
me is
do a lot of
beautiful.
freestyle, and yeah,
I
no,
watch it,
I'm
you know, I love it
that
because
awesome,
that's
man.
very
I'm glad you.
creative. You're just letting yourself flow and taking
Yeah,
words and, you know, rapping them out and blah about this and that, and you know, taking a
yeah.
freestyle. You know, I can't do it myself. You know, I used to write a lot of poetry, and so I know a
Right.
lot of the power of the rhythms and the power
Mm-hmm.
of the imagery. You know, you write
Yeah.
words, there you're painting pictures with them. And so they're
Yes.
like, you know, like icons in themselves, because you know, word icon means, you know, image. And so you
Yes.
can write, and that's when I write. And if you read, you know, my books, I think you might have, um American, even like American Orthodox, and you know,
Yeah,
my
I'm making my way
voice
through Voice in the Wilderness right
voice
now.
in the
This one,
wilderness.
yeah, I'm making my way through this one. It's so good. I'm really enjoying
Oh,
this
thank
one.
you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Thank
so
you.
good. Delving into the life and legacy of Father Seraphim Rose, and man, it's just really good. I didn't even know that it was a trilogy with American Orthodox being the first one. I think Light
Hmm.
Journey being the second
Right,
one. I
right,
need to get
right.
Light Journey still, and then the third one being Voice in the Wilderness, which is just being it's
Yeah.
I'm loving it so far.
Oh,
So maybe
thanks.
maybe I'll work through it backwards since I started
Okay,
it that
yeah,
way.
and that they're written, and actually, at one point I was actually just writing like one book, American Orthodox, and it was going to be, you know, it would actually have been like all three of those would have really have been, you know,
Been like a
one book.
massive book, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it'd have been like three, four, 500 pages, depending.
Right?
And so, but then I said, you know what? And I know this is to be true, you know, because like I said, back in my day, as we say, you know,
Yeah.
you could read books because you didn't really have a lot of, you know, you didn't have YouTube videos, you didn't have Netflix, you didn't have just so much content available. So even when I mean, I've been writing books, you know, I got first published, you know, by a publisher, you know, I was on the Donahue show. I did a lot of, you know, other types of work, you know, wrote books on consumer credit, finance,
Wow.
personal privacy, and all that type of stuff. Identity theft. I was like one of the first people who wrote on that
Oh
topic.
wow, that's cool. I had
Yeah, I
no
was like,
idea. I had no idea about all that.
yeah, I got called to speak, you know, from like the what was it, Association of Former Intelligence Officers, you know, out there in
Whoa.
Connecticut, and I was the spokesperson for Capital One for a little
Wow.
while. Yeah, so these are just, you know, and this is all after, you know, I was in the military, as I mentioned,
Right.
and
Right.
so when I
Makes
got
sense.
out of there, you know, I decided to go back and do other things. That was one of them. Actually, one the crazy story on that, my first book was my first published book. It was called Credit Secrets,
Oh
and
wow.
how that came about is that actually by the time, you know, by the time I got out of the military, and this is, you know, it was Cold War, guys, so we were like against the Soviets, and you know,
Right.
godless
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
communism, and those
Yeah.
were like our quote enemies. And we did like mostly, and I won't say I personally did these things, but you know, our we were at quote peacetime, but we were down there in Nicaragua, Panama, Grenada, you know, all these kind of behind the scenes things. And there was definitely stuff in the Middle East too back then. But
Right.
most of the things that anyone would even hear a little glimpses of, you know, were kind of like what we're seeing now with Venezuela. You know, we were that type of things were going on, and I was, you know, I was the, you know, not like a frontline person doing those things,
Right.
but I was aware of them. I was in like
Yeah.
logistics and supply, and so I kind of knew, here we got to send this stuff over here, and this is
Right.
going here, and people come and it's like, oh, and I was in charge of a bunch of weapons, and so that was kind of my military experience. I was a armorer, and so we had to, we had an Air Force base. I was in Colorado Springs, which is
Nice.
right by NORAD. If you've ever seen War Games,
Oh,
that
War
movie
Games
called
with
War Game.
Matthew Broderick. Yeah, yeah, I have it on
Yeah,
VHS.
that's where I
I have a huge
was.
VHS collection, so
Okay, perfect.
I kind of understand a lot of weird old things that are way
Right.
before my era. Because
Yeah,
I've like 10,000 VHS tapes in storage, which I gotta go
okay.
get soon. Yeah, so it's yeah. So
So
you're very
you
familiar.
watched that one, so NORAD then. So I
Yeah.
wasn't in NORAD, but I could see it out my window. I'll just put it that
Okay.
way. I mean,
That's
literally,
cool.
it's like I was in the barracks in the Colorado Springs, Fort Carson, and NORAD's there. There's Peterson Air Force Base there. There's the Air Force Academy there. I mean, all these places are right around, and we're on the Army, military base.
Right.
And so, I was
Right.
worked for like a headquarters company. So I worked, kind of in the center of a lot. We had like different officers that did different things, and I was kind of like, back behind them, so to speak. So anyway,
Nice. Nice. Speaking of, we brought up Father Seraphim Rose. Did he play or Saint Seraphim Rose? He's hopefully soon he'll be
mhm.
officially canonized. I think he's being canonized in certain areas already. There's a couple
Yeah,
areas, if I'm
that's
not mistaken.
Georgia. There's a diocese in Georgia, Metropolitan Nicolosi. There has, in his within his realm says, yeah, we recognize him as a saint. There
Right.
are other people, obviously who have, done the same thing. Rocor
Right.
now, Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, Bishop
Yeah.
James, who I know personally.
Oh
In
wow.
fact, it's funny. I just gave him a copy of that book, the one that you tell, Voice in the Wilderness.
Oh wow.
I gave him
Nice.
that when I saw him in Sonora
Oh
at
wow. Yeah.
the monastery of St. Catherine
Yeah.
there
I
just a
actually
couple.
was. Yeah, I was there. That was awesome.
Yeah, so that's yeah. So I actually saw him there, and I've known him for years, and I've sat down and talked to him a few times. And he was actually one of those people at the there's a book that what's everyone wrote called at when his name was Eugene Rose,
Yeah.
God's Revelation of the Human Heart, and
Right.
that was actually a lecture series. We did a couple lectures, about the end times and about that at
Yeah.
UC Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bishop James, who's now Bishop James, was one of those students in that
Wow.
there, yeah, as well as Abbot Damascene, who's the
Oh,
abbot of Platina, as well as Metropolitan Jonah, who you may
they were
know
all in that
about.
class?
They were all in that, and
That's crazy. Wow.
Bishop
That's
Gerasim
powerful.
in Texas. Yeah, so those are just a few. I mean, those are, and we all know people in the Orthodox Church mostly know those ones I'm mentioning
Yeah.
because they came out of and they were just students, they weren't
Yeah.
like Orthodox Christians or it was
Right.
just a
Right.
group that, oh, we're gonna have a speaker, and you can imagine, you're in college, here's a speaker, and you got like Sarah from Rose walks in with a
What
long
a
beard and is
man
like,
out of left
what
field.
the
That would hit people. I mean, that
yeah,
would hit me. That would
yeah,
just
yeah,
twist my brain all up
right.
into a,
And obviously that's what happened there.
Yeah.
So, but actually when I was at the feast day of St. Catherine, which was December 7th,
Mm-hmm.
actually was the date of their thing there in Sonora. I went, I saw him there, and I'd met him before, and I saw him I've seen him several places and times over the years. But anyway,
Right.
because I'm in Sacramento, so he comes out here too. Anyway, but I gave him a copy of the book, and I showed him, hey, and you're in here, he goes, oh, really? Where am I? And I flip through there's a chapter on Revelation to the human heart. So it's basically the book's
Yes.
my reflections on me coming and visiting Platina, me coming, not just me coming to the Orthodox Church, they had already come in, and then it was just like learning about Father Seraphim Rose and going and visiting Platina, the
Right.
monastery that he founded there, and
Yeah.
just my experience of kind of the shifting of my own worldview as I started taking in a lot of his writings. I read his life and works. I read Genesis, creation, early man.
Yeah.
Soul after death, nihilism.
Yeah.
I mean, and it let's go on. Letters,
Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future is a good
religious
one for
fusion.
people coming out of New Age, especially. That
That
one hit
was a
me
super
hard.
one. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
absolutely.
That was
Yeah, I
like a
know
just
people
like a
who.
KO punch to
Yeah,
me.
exactly. And that's really what it was for me too.
Yeah.
So many of the other ones, just they're all very, very well written, and even like survival course, which you can't necessarily
Right. I got the
You know,
PDF
I'm
file of
so
that one.
yeah, you can get versions of it, and I in Father Peter Hears and Father John Valadez,
Oh
they've
yeah, yeah,
done,
yeah. The one who
they've
took
gone,
over Death to the World. Yeah. Great
yeah,
priest.
done in, it does say Timothy's in Lompoc.
Mm.
So anyway, yeah, which
Hmm.
by the way, Lompoc, which is where he is, that's right near
Exactly.
Santa Maria, which is where I grew up. So I grew up in
Oh
Santa Maria,
wow.
California,
Okay,
small
that puts
town.
things into perspective for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting, the church I go to now is called Elevation Holy Cross
Oh
here in
wow.
Sacramento.
I think I'm familiar with that one. I
Probably
believe
are. Yeah,
so. Yeah.
it's a pretty popular,
I think I
American.
followed them online if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they have yeah, online services. And so
Right.
the priest who was the head priest here at this church, he's retired now, but he's still there, Father Ian.
Mm.
Um, he actually founded and started that church in Santa Maria, California, which is
Oh
such a
wow.
small town that, when I mention Santa Maria, most people are like, okay, I've never heard
That's
of that. Where's
that's
that?
interesting. That's interesting because I
Yeah.
was one of the questions I was going to ask you is have you had any what I used to call synchronicities when I was in the New
Mm,
Age, but I would like to refer to
hmm.
as like providential experiences in your
Right.
path to orthodoxy that may stand out to you as spiritually significant. I've had a lot,
Oh,
oddly.
absolutely.
It's right. Yeah, it's just it's odd the amount of providential circumstances that
We say
tend to lead
coincidence.
us into the church that I've heard from
Hmm.
different people from all different types of walks of life, you know?
Yeah,
It's,
absolutely. And that's yeah, just as you say, I mean, you can use different words. You can say
yeah.
synchronicity, which I know Jungian kind of
It's kind of
uses that
Jungian.
word
Yeah, yeah,
more,
yeah.
but it's still, it's still what it is,
I
whether
still
you
think
use that
there's
word.
validity to it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can say coincidence, which I always jokingly say that's like God's way of remaining anonymous, because God's
Right,
actually
right.
doing all this, but it's like, okay, we're gonna like a little wink at you. It's like, oh yeah, that just exactly happened that exact minute, just for no reason at all.
For no reason, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly.
But you can look back, usually is the way that it works, is you can look back and
Mm,
see things. Yeah, and every now and then something
mm.
happens where it's like, you probably had this happen, you're thinking about a person and they call you. And it's not
Yeah,
somebody that you talk to like every day. It's somebody that you haven't heard from or thought
yeah,
about for a long time. And it's like, boom, it's like, what? Or, I've had, you probably had this too. Like get in my car and I'm thinking of Led Zeppelin, ramble on, like some,
right.
random song. And I literally turn my car on and the song comes on.
Yeah,
Have you
yeah,
had
a
those
hundred
kind of things?
percent.
Those are like little things,
Those are like
but
little mini ones, right? Yeah.
they're like, man, that's like
But what
crazy.
they can all kind of come
But bigger
together and add up
things.
over time too. Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of just lets people know what those little things are. You're like in some country or some different town that you haven't been in, and then it's like you see somebody from your hometown, or I mean, those kind of things happen. Just so I
Right.
could so back to your specific question. Yeah, little things like that, they're kind of crazy. Like I said, people, like Father Ian, being, having basically started that church there in Santa Maria where I grew up. And then
Yeah,
even the fact
that's
growing up in Santa Maria in a church called First Christian Church, which just by the
exactly.
name of it is like,
Yeah.
what are you trying to say here?
That totally is exactly along the lines of what I'm talking about for sure.
Yeah. And then even the name of the town, Santa Maria, it
Yeah.
was like,
Santa Maria. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Right, it's right there in front. Sometimes
What's
it's
our,
right in
what?
front of you and you don't even
I know.
see it.
Oh,
Sometimes
yeah.
you know,
I
it's
never
so
thought about it because I
interesting.
wasn't Catholic, which is, the people there were that, but, I was, I didn't really think about the saints. And actually, like our high school team, was called the Santa Maria Saints.
Oh wow. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, yeah. So you
Yeah.
grow up going through that and then look back and you think, wow, actually, I was surrounded by saints and the Virgin Mary, Saint Mary, Santa Maria,
Right.
even though at the time it didn't even cross my mind. I didn't even know who that was, I guess, other than, yeah, I've read some of the parts of the New Testament. I mean, eventually I became
Right.
more as I went through all these other New Age things and a lot of other religions. I studied, I read, Bhagavad Gita, the I
Mm.
Ching,
Mm-hmm.
various Hindu or
Yeah.
Buddhist, you know, texts. And, interesting, I was into yoga and meditation and a lot of
I
different,
was
gurus and
yep.
that stuff. Alan Watts, as I mentioned early on,
Yeah.
Zen. so those are things that were in part of my background. And but as I kind of was more, I guess, rebellious, I talked about the whole political, anti-war movement in the 60s and all that. I got caught up in a lot of different, concepts and ideas, ideologies, and over the years, I've shifted perspective, many times, because it's like you can like live your life focused on, here's the most important thing. We should all blah blah blah. Like everybody should fill in the blank. Everyone should what protest this war or this president or this take up this cause or smoke pot or take this drug or
Right.
do these techniques. This is the perfect mantra, etc. Those
Mhm.
were different things that I had done, and I went through all these groups and cults and various things like that. They got you get sucked into them because you're thinking, oh yeah, we want to save the world and we're gonna do this thing, and we know now this is what we need to know. We should all do XYZ, and that
Right.
kind of group think
Yeah.
that gets easily can be very destructive. And it may sound good at first, say
Yeah.
like angels of light, as they say, these
Right.
various whether it's a guru that comes your way, and I've studied with a lot of those types.
Yeah.
It's a certain technique, or it's like I said, some special cause. And again, the thing itself may be good. You're like, I want to save the environment, or I want to save, stop war. You want peace. It's okay. That's,
Right.
you know, not argue against it, but
Hmm.
obviously, nowadays it's like if you, criticize, certain things or certain groups, you're, fill in the blank of some ad hominem name because
Hmm.
it's like you're not almost allowed, as much as we're like into, I don't want to get into the whole politics
Yeah.
thing
No,
here, but I'm
no,
just
I
saying,
say I say enough on my own to I'm probably
yeah.
on some list or something somewhere,
Right,
but
exactly. That's the thing. Yeah. So I went through a lot of those kinds of just trying to think about things different ways and just saying
yeah.
things that you think off the top of your head. Like you said, you're freestyling. So it's just
Yeah.
stuff just kind of comes out. And
Yeah.
that's, I think for me, I write a lot. And so I ended up, before I came or like back to, you actually asked about, those coincidences. That was one
Yeah.
when I was just saying Santa Maria growing up, First Christian Church. It gave me some influences, positive influences, in spite of myself, in spite of my own, destructive or rebellious path. And then, like I said, I was in the army, I was at Fort Carson, Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And then, later on, I found like the church again that I go to now, the wife of our priest now, she's from Colorado Springs,
Oh wow.
and and her family, and they are here in Sacramento now. And that was a great church there, which I, obviously I wasn't aware of it, at the time. And I lived in Riverside for many, many years. That's Father Josiah Trenum's church,
Yeah.
who I was able to go down and visit. But again, I
Yeah.
wasn't
St.
Orthodox during
Andrews.
any of these times when I was in these places.
Right.
Santa Maria, which has a big growing Orthodox thing now. Riverside, I spent many, many years there. They have a big, one of the biggest Orthodox churches there. Colorado Springs, they've
Hmm.
actually been expanding, breaking the walls down with, building new churches just to fill in. So those are kind of coincidences in a sense. And then when I was in the Bay Area, when I finally came up here and I, married my wife, we, we just do different things. We were living in the Bay Area. And one day she was like, "Oh, let's go to, there's a Greek festival in town. You want to go to that?" And I'm
Mm.
like, "Okay, sure." Didn't give it a second thought of what does that even mean. Obviously, a Greek festival, okay, that's gonna be
Get some
food,
Greek food, right? Food.
music. Those are only two things. Might some people be dancing and doing some
Right.
ethnic, dance stuff. And it's like, okay, folk music or whatever. That'll be interesting. And we went there, and that's all I had in my mind was, oh yeah, that's music, food, baklavas, and all kinds of shish kebabs or whatever. Ate all that stuff. And I remember even buying like a gift, just a couple of gifts, because they had all these wood carvings, olive
Right.
wood. And I remember buying these, there's actually called praying hands, it's just like that's what it looks like. And it was
Right.
like hand carved. And I remember saying, oh, that'll be a good Christmas present for my family. And so we actually, to my family and my parents, they still have that today. And I remember saying, oh yeah, I remember that
That's
praying
awesome.
hands. And I remember years before that, as a little kid, my dad, would order these like things. They had like those mail order catalogs. You could order stuff. I remember
Right.
him getting
Yeah.
a little plaque. It had the praying hands on it, and it actually had the prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Which,
Right.
and this is me as a little kid seeing that and think, oh, that's a nice, prayer.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so
That one's
that's,
alwa's been really powerful for me. And
yeah, and
it's
that's
because
how
it's something I
the
still
12
struggle with
step
all the time. Like,
groups
I think
use
we all
that a
do.
lot.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful prayer because it's really about,
Kind of,
surrendering,
yep. Yep.
acceptance, and then,
Coming into
what's that
alignment with
wisdom?
God's will.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Which
So
is,
that was something. And then eventually, when I did find the Orthodox Church, I mean, by that time, I had gone to various denominational things and,
yeah.
evangelicals and, reformists and, things like that. I tried, try to be kind of quote born again for a while. I was like,
Right.
not
Right.
really working. And then
Yeah.
there's like end
Right.
times kind of stuff,
Oh
and
yeah.
there was all
You
these
got
different.
the rapture stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I went through a lot of it. I was like, man, I had
Mm-hmm.
never grown up thinking about some of this extreme type of stuff. But
Right.
once you get into a church where that's what they're talking about, you're like, oh, okay. And they're like telling you, oh, well, see, don't see right here, the Bible says X, Y, Z. They all spoke in tongues. So you're like, oh, okay. I didn't even give that too much thought. I thought it just meant different language, which is what it does mean.
Yeah.
But they're,
Right. Yeah. But they'll take that and run with it. Right. And
telling you, yeah, exactly. Or this verse here where it says this, it means, okay, that means that Jesus is gonna just like pop and everybody's gonna disappear into the clouds. I'm like, wait a minute. I never
yeah.
thought that before. I mean, and I literally have read the Bible cover to cover. I mean, I actually went through a period of time where I was like really into it and I just read it,
That's
went
awesome.
through it, different versions of it. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
and obviously I still don't know it. I listen to now they have daily Orthodox scriptures. It's like an
Yeah.
Orthodox podcast. So
Mm-hmm.
like every day, like 15, 20 minutes of different chapters and verses. And so I just kind of keep keeping that up because to me that has always been the most, universally, significant book of all time,
Yeah.
Bible,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so
100%.
even when I started believing all these other things, I never quote did not believe that Jesus Christ was Jesus
Right.
Christ or that
That's
the
the
Bible was
yeah.
important.
That's an interesting part of my own journey. I had like moments of doubt, but I think even when I was in like my deepest state of like Kundalini yoga and all that, I was trying to
Hmm.
blend it. I was trying to blend it with
Hmm.
like Christ and like Christ consciousness kind of stuff.
Right. Oh yeah.
I was like, no, I can do all of this and make my own kind of. I was like, I'm gonna find the original church kind of thing. I was like, all I know is
Mm,
all these things I'm seeing are wrong. And I was like, we're missing something. I'd kind of
right.
gotten into this mentality of I was looking for the original Eucharist. I didn't know if it was psychedelic mushrooms.
Oh,
There's books on
interesting.
that. I
Yeah,
was
oh
going down
sure.
that path. I was going down that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
David Patrick Harry, does a lot on
Yes.
that Church of the
Which
Eternal
is
Logos. He's a good guy.
yeah, which I had a weird coincidence, right?
Mhm.
After I had went to a high dose psychedelic ceremony. I'm sure you probably heard the testimony. It's intense, but I jumped in a fire that night. I got into a fight and all these things. But right after that, like a couple days later, and I was looking for the original church. Like that was my whole intention at the ceremony,
Mm,
basically. I said tap
mm,
into source, but that's what I was saying is that's what I was
right.
trying to articulate.
Hmm.
And then 2 days later, maybe even a day later, the days talk about days blending. That really made days blend. 15 grams of mushrooms, Lord have mercy. And
Yeah.
it was intense. And because I mean, for like the next week, I was still, in a different place. But I came
Mm,
back and Church of the Eternal Logos was on like in the next day or two, and he had on Your Mate Tom. And Your Mate Tom is
mm,
at the time he was inquiring into Holy Orthodoxy. I think now he's back in the New Age. I'm not sure, but he had just come back
hmm.
from a big ayahuasca ceremony in like Peru or something. And he had taken all this ayahuasca and he freaked out and he got like blacked out and he got held down by like the workers there. And it was just like a whole ordeal. And I remember hearing that and I was still trying to work out what had happened to me. Like, was it right? Was it me? Did I not prepare right? Or was it demonic? I was still trying to work it out because I have all these people from this ceremony telling me, nah, it's you. You didn't prepare right. And I'm like, I fasted for like ever. And I fasted from food and I took it very serious. Like I think a lot more serious than a lot of people that were at that ceremony, to be honest, just from what
Hmm.
I witnessed. And they kept putting it back on me, like, nah, it's you. That's why you had a bad trip. And I was like, I don't know. But I saw that interview and it just clicked. I was like, no, it's demonic. Like this is the same thing that happened to me, and this is 100% demonic. This is not the fruits of the Holy Spirit. I'll tell you that.
Mm,
Like it was chaos. It wasn't peace, it
Wow.
wasn't harmony, it was the opposite of all that. It was chaotic, violent outbursts of just, it was demonic
Mm.
influence, and
Right, right.
it took me hearing that other testimony from your mate Tom on that show on Church of the Eternal Logos, and it just all clicked. And it was
Hmm.
like almost like orthodoxy just kind of like God just kind of dropped it out of the sky onto my lap. And I knew instantly. It was so instant. It was so weird. And yeah, once I got into the church, I mean, that was just another level of confirmation, like, oh, I'm home. Like right when I
Mm.
walked in, I knew this was the church I was looking for the whole time. Like this was not even just the church, but this is what I was looking for my whole life, like,
Glory to God. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So that
Yeah,
was powerful.
that's a good testimony. And it's interesting, yeah. It's like you can say, quote coincidence. I just happened to mention that, and it's like ties into your story too,
Yeah.
because back to the idea of like these kind of synchronicities, coincidences, etc., providential moments. All
Right.
these. You could look back and think, oh, I don't know if you ever remember, this again before your time, maybe a cartoon called Mr. Magoo.
Oh no,
He
I'm
was
I'm
like,
familiar with that. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, he's like this blind guy. He's got like his cane. I think he had like a dog and stuff to it. And he's like, he
Right.
goes through all these different adventures. Like he's like, okay, today we're going to go to this appointment for the dentist or something. And
Right.
before he knows it, he's like walking across like airplane wings and steel
Because he's
girders, and
blind and
he's
right.
yeah, he doesn't know where he's going. He thinks he does, and it's like he's like what? It's like all kinds of stuff, and like he's like falling off cliffs, but he doesn't really you feel it. And then it's like something just catches him and he goes to the next place. And
Oh
then he ends
man,
up where he wants and oh, okay, well, we got that done today, sir.
that's
And then
hilarious.
and I think, that's kind of like my life. It's like you're going through all these
Right.
things,
Oh dude.
falling
And
off
God's
cliffs.
God's just kind of like this plane, like the Holy Spirit like comes and like just, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't realize where you're actually going, but it's like, you get there, you get where you
Yeah.
need to go eventually, but it's
Yeah.
like you didn't really do it yourself by
A hundred
yourself.
percent. I didn't get here by myself. I jumped in a
Yeah.
fire and laid there.
Oh, that's
And
crazy.
like it
Yeah.
was nuts. Yeah, I was just I mean, but it was deep
Well, you
spiritual
survived
warfare
it.
going on. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did survive it exactly, which makes a
Okay.
powerful testimony kind of coming out
Oh
of the
yeah.
fire, literally through the
Like
fire, literally,
Phoenix, yeah, raising.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, so we all go through it. I had my
Mm-hmm.
share, not that
Yep.
exact one, obviously, but
Yeah, no. Totally.
back to my kind of testimonial things is I got like heavy into like especially after I got out of the military. I was that's actually how I ended up writing books because I had gotten my so
Right.
bad, my marriage that I had at the time, it fell apart. I would start doing like heavy drugs 'cause I had like a lot of some chronic pain and some other, issues that came
Right.
not, I don't want to blame, everything on anyone else, but
Yeah.
just that experience, I came out and I had some injuries, some other things that were going on, some chronic pains and so forth. And I
Right.
think just a lot of mental, anxiety and stress,
Yeah. Yep.
that even though I wasn't like a battle, combat guy like a lot of the guys today, and I know many veterans
Yeah.
that I mean they were like really so I mean I felt bad sometimes when I go to the VA, because I did go to the VA, and I did actually work for the State Department of Veterans Affairs, so I've worked in that field, and did other kind of counseling and educational work. So, I have a lot of empathy, sympathy, and
Yeah.
love for, veterans, being one, my family is being one. But at the same
Yeah,
time,
my
not,
father was a veteran too. Yeah.
yeah, and you don't realize all of what you're doing. You think, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I think most people they're like, I'm defending my country,
Yeah.
you do need people who can
100%.
do something for a bigger cause, even though a lot of times we realize later on, say, wait a minute, what were we actually fighting for there? What was Vietnam about? What was Iraq? It's like you do realize that there's a lot. Most of the time we may wake up kind of after the fact and think,
Yeah.
wait a minute, that didn't happen the way that they told me the
Yeah.
story, etc. And like 1984, if we going flashing back to that one, it's
Mm-hmm.
like the whole thing there was like we're always at war with Eurasia, and East Asia's our ally. And then the next day it's like we're always at war with East Asia. Eurasia's always been our ally. Oh, okay. Let's see. Wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute. I thought it was. and you can see, that plays out now. It's like you look historically, you see different countries that were allied with each other, and oh, here, these are the guys that are invading us, but now they're
Right.
like our best ally. These are the guys who've been, destroying our country, but oh, there's our best ally now. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. And then people who, groups who were like our allies, okay, here's, they're helping us, during whether it's the War of Independence or the Civil War or World War I, World War II.
Yeah.
Oh, you got our president, next to, Stalin, say, yeah,
Right.
these are our allies. We fought against Hitler. Yeah, but now it's like,
Right.
oh, well, we're gonna align with this other group against these, evil people. So anyway, again, not to get off on that tangent,
Right.
but that was saying that about having come out of the military, you kind of unwind from a lot of this stuff. It's like, okay, wait a
Mm.
minute, what was I thinking? Because you're always kind of on battle readiness too, because you're,
Right.
like I said, I was right there, in like near NORAD. I wasn't like I said part of it, so I'm not trying to take credit for being in that, in
Right. Right.
itself.
Right.
But like I said, I could see it right out my window, and I knew we were kind of supporting a lot of other things that were going on. So I was way behind the scenes. But coming out, and like I said, my marriage fell apart at the time, and my went kind of a self-destructive spiral. I started getting in trouble with the law, drugs, and all that stuff. And so when I got through that temporarily, even, I was like, man, my whole life is destroyed. I mean, my credit got really messed up. You're borrowing money, I'm
Yeah.
writing bad checks and doing
Right.
all
Right.
this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, I got to the point where I couldn't even open up a bank account, literally, even a savings account, because they were
Wow.
like, I may go in there with like $100 in cash, and I just want to open a savings account. They're like, okay. And then they look, say, wait a minute, what's your name again? What's your social security number? And I was like, nah, sorry, sir, you're not eligible to, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
Wow.
wait, what? I'm giving you cash. Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we don't want it. Get out of here.
Wow.
Security.
That's
I
crazy.
was that bad, just, um, so that's how I started. Wow, what the, what am I do? Because you couldn't, and it's like that now. You can't even like rent an apartment, get a
Yeah.
job or do anything hardly, because all the stuff's on your records.
Right.
And so I kind
Yeah.
of learned. So that was kind of what led me back into, I'd been always kind of a research guy, and I used to always go to back we had these things called libraries where you actually go and look at books. Nowadays you just push a button, it's like, okay, Wikipedia, tell me what I need to know about everything.
Right. Exactly.
It's,
Yeah.
so I would do that research, and I found out about the credit system. Wait a minute. So there's like TRW, there's Experian, there's TransUnion, there's big credit bureaus, and they sometimes can make your credit worse than it really is, because they'll actually add up a bunch of stuff that might have not really happened, or they kind of mix your names up. And I'm not saying they all do this deliberately per se,
Right. Right.
but I realized it was a lot like, like a lot of the media, and a lot of back in those days, you'd have like these tabloids, National Enquirer and stuff. And
Yeah.
it's like they'd all kind of have the same stories, but they were always like, just how much dirt can we get on XYZ? How much
Mm.
scandal. And so that
Yeah.
makes it more valuable. Ooh, I want to read about, so and so, Elvis Presley, or whoever, Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And so the
Yeah.
same thing with the credit bureaus were kind of like that. That was how I learned about it, is I realized that they actually make more money the more dirt they can put on you, because it looks like, oh, we're doing
Interesting.
our job because we got all this stuff. And then not to mention, then now the person has to pay more for their
Yeah.
credit, because they have to get a higher interest rate, and they have all these, point systems, et cetera. And so that makes them want to get into more debt so they can borrow more money. And so I learned
Yeah.
kind of the inside of that system, and that's when
And
I
that
ended
ended
writing.
up being your first book, right? You were
Yeah,
saying.
it's called Credit Secrets. And to be honest, even that book, it wasn't, I didn't plan on writing a book. I was just like, how do I do this? And I start learning, and I go, oh, okay, you do this first, you get these credit reports, and then you can do this. And I met somebody who was like he was a military intelligence person as well,
Yeah.
who knew, he worked at TRW, and he was like the head of their security, and had been in like the military criminal investigation division, CID. And
Right.
so I talked to him, and then I also met with like a guy who's a bankruptcy attorney. And so he was working with a lot of people and helping them kind of erase and restore their credit.
Right.
And it
Right.
wasn't any books on it, because I would go to the, quote, the library or the bookstore, and I'd say, I need a book on how do I do this. And the only books they'd have was like, okay, here's a book on budgeting. I'm like, no, it's not
Right.
what I'm saying. Or here's a book on bankruptcy laws. I'm like, no, I don't really, that's not going to solve my problem. My
Yeah.
problem was I have bad credit. I need to get it cleaned up enough so I can buy a
Yeah.
car or rent an apartment or have, even a bank
Survive.
account.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
couldn't really
Yeah.
function in
Couldn't do
and I
anything.
and so I remember this whole, I used to think, as a kid, you'd like all these futuristic, I remember the coming cashless society and the whole thing, everything's on these social credits and stuff. I used to think about a lot of that stuff,
Yeah.
as a kid, just in science fiction world.
Talk about another little providential kind of thing there, maybe. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
so that's how I ended up writing that book because I learned how to do it. And then I had friends, and by the time I did get a job, and then I got work, I was a government employee.
Hmm.
And then so my coworkers, I'd have friends, and a lot of us had, other issues too. And I remember saying, "Hey, I finally got a credit card." They go, "Oh, wow, how'd you do that, man? I thought you were blah blah blah." And I was like, "Well, you do this and you do this," and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, slow down, tell me how to do it." And then I tell them, and then they tell people, they say, "Hey, I heard you could do this." I'm like, "Yeah." So how do you do it? I go, "Well, you do this." And I go, "Wait a minute, I'm gonna after about a couple dozen people asking me,
That's
and
awesome, though,
I'm
man.
yeah." So I would write it down. I go, "Let me just write this down." And so I literally
Yeah,
wrote down like a step by step. Step one, do this. Do this,
because
or you can do this.
you're doing the work and you're doing this research. You're putting a lot of work into. It's not easy
Right,
to learn those kind of, maybe loopholes or whatever you want to make it. It's
right.
like
They were,
to
yeah.
learn these kind of, but like if you can learn them and implement them, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. No, and that's crazy too, because it was like I literally tried just to find a book on it for myself. I just
Hmm.
needed my own help. And then I ended up, well, there's no other books out here. And I didn't plan on writing a book actually. I just wanted to know how to do it. And I
Just taking
did
some
it.
notes and then right,
And I kept writing it down, writing it down. And I said, wait a minute, this is just taking too much time. Now everybody's asking me questions all the time.
right,
Just
right.
started getting, just like word of mouth, wasn't,
Yeah,
again, this is before the internet. I mean, we're talking
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
late 80s.
Wow.
And
Okay, gotcha.
so I finally wrote it all down and I just literally typed it out. And again, not even having a computer, just like a literal typewriter,
Typewriter. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
electronic typewriter. So I mean, you could write like just like a page at a time of data, I mean, it was
Right,
crazy.
right, right,
Yeah,
right.
back
Different
white
times.
out, all the stuff that people, most kids nowadays, like, what do you mean white out? What's that? It's like you literally, you type
Yeah,
something and you can literally like have to go
yeah,
back and like put stuff to make it go away. So
yep.
you couldn't just delete and restart it. Anyway, that was, and then like I said, books, you literally get like stacks of books and you
Yeah,
do research. That was the
exactly.
research then.
Physical books. Yeah.
Physical books and physical conversations with physical
Yes,
people, and you go and
exactly.
meet, sit down with somebody, have lunch, buy them coffee, etc. And then, oh, okay, go to seminars. There'll be like a few little kind of underground, here we're going to show you how to, you know avoid bankruptcy or do this. And so I'd learn all this stuff, and then,
Yeah.
as I said, I wrote it all down, and then I typed it all out, and then I
Hmm.
literally had a, like a 20, 30, 40 page thing typed out, with a little corner stapled. And I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. When somebody next time you ask me to do this, I'm not going to do all the stuff for you, it's just taking too much time. But here's this little pamphlet that I wrote. I mean, it's literally typed out, 8.5 by 11 pages, 20, 30
Yeah.
pages, staple the corner. And if you really want me to help you, I'll give you this. You give me $20. You can have
Nice.
this. And then you can ask me any question. But I want you to read this and do this stuff on your own first. And that
Right.
way,
To
when
see
you
if,
have
yeah.
questions, I'm not like telling you everything over and over the same things.
Right. And then you get the people that are actually serious about actually wanting to,
Yeah. And
yeah.
and when they ask the question, they actually asking it more, with knowledge, like, oh, I read this thing, and it was real short, like 20, 30 pages. And then I had like a
Right.
part two, it's kind of my secret stuff. It's like, okay, if you really want to go, like, okay, I need
Deeper.
to like start over from scratch. I need to like zero everything out and go, be a whole new, identity type of person. And I used to read like
Mm,
books on alternate identities. And so I got into some heavy,
that's interesting.
kind of, yeah, undercover and, military intelligence types of things.
That's pretty awesome.
Um, yeah, yeah, it was interesting. And so that's I learned a lot about like IDs, and back in those days too, it's like it wasn't as, systematic. I mean, we did, it was barely before they had even had like ATMs. I mean, so everything was still, you could get, like literally birth certificates, and you could
Yeah.
create things, in a sense. So I won't go too heavily into what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did
No,
or
I'm
didn't
sure. I'm
did or
sure
did
that
not
could be
do.
right.
But that was part of
That's
my
fascinating.
background. I learned about it. I'll just say it that way.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and then I ended up one day, and I was reading these underground magazines and books. There was like, anarchist cookbook type of stuff, and
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
these catalogs that you could order. These books on like espionage and alternate identities and that type of stuff. It was like one called Paladin Press, and that was started by the people who did this thing called Soldier of Fortune, and they
Oh,
were out of Colorado, which is where I was from too. And they split up. There was one that did, Soldier of Fortune magazine, which is really for like, mercenaries and stuff, all about,
right.
magazines about, here's an
Man,
adventure you
that's
can go.
cool.
Let's, make money, go to, Afghanistan and fight these people, go to the Congo,
Yeah.
fight these people, go over to Ukraine or wherever, and there's the people that
Yeah.
do these things still, as
Yeah.
you probably know, Venezuela,
Yeah.
etc. And so there was books on that, and there was, so it was kind of in that realm, not me personally going and doing any of it, but
Right.
just reading
Right.
and knowing how it was done and how they would
Yeah.
do different things with, like spies and detectives. And there was a group called Paladin Press, which was the publisher, and that was a split up of the Soldier of Fortune magazine back in those days. And so one
That
day,
is
yeah,
so
somebody,
cool.
yeah, and I would get their their little catalog, basically a mail order catalog, because these are books you couldn't like go in a bookstore and say, "I want a book on how to create a new identity." No, bro, no, get
Right.
out of here.
Right. Yeah.
I want to build bombs. I want to make a silencer. I mean, these are the kind of some of the books that they would actually sell. I mean, I wasn't into those personally, but I was like the unit armor, so I did know a little bit about weapons. But I wasn't. That's not my thing personally.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a crazy sidetrack for what our
No,
topics
this is
are, but
so cool. This is so cool. Yeah. No, that's
that's
so fascinating.
yeah. So that's how I ended up writing. So one day that Paladin Press, they actually had one of their magazines said, "Hey, we've got a contest for we're looking for book manuscript contest or something like that." I was like, "Oh, interesting." And they're like, "So we were looking for alternate you know how to beat the system kinds of books and stuff."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah." Interesting. And then well, I got my little pamphlet that I put together. It's not really a book, I didn't consider it like it wasn't written out in manuscript format or anything. It was a little
Right.
just like typed together, single spaced, and it just said, all the stuff that I was saying.
Hmm.
And then I sent them that, just you literally back in those days, when you submit manuscripts for publishing, you type it out and you'd send it to them. And then I forgot all about it. And I was working as a writer for this real estate magazine at the time. Had a little post office box where I'd do my, other business stuff. And I remember going to my post office box one day, it was like months later. I had totally not thought about that. And then all of a sudden I get this letter in there from Paladin Press, and they're like, "Congratulations, you've won our manuscript contest. You get a
Oh,
thousand
wow.
dollars and a
Oh,
publishing
wow.
contract." I'm like, "Wait, what?"
What? That's
Like,
awesome.
stop it. I'm driving, like I had just gotten out of there with my mail, I'm like, "Oh, what's this? Oh, it's a, wait, what?" Anyway,
That's awesome. That's so
and
cool.
so yeah, that's how I got my first publishing contract.
Wow.
And they actually said, "Well, we also want that second part that you hinted at in there about the whole starting over with a whole new identity. We want that part too, and we can make it into a
Nice.
whole book." And so that
Yeah.
was my first book, Credit Secrets. It got into all that. Here's how the
Dang.
credit.
I'm gonna have to look into that book, man. Getting a copy of
Yeah,
that book.
it's
That sounds
it's old.
amazing.
I mean, some of its stuff's out of date because it's. I mean, we're talking like it's like
Right.
'89. I mean, I've written like 20 books
Yeah.
since then. So these books on Orthodox things I started writing a few years ago. I wrote a book, or I was an editor and helped contribute to a book called Roads Less Traveled: Journeys to
Mm.
Orthodoxy. And that has like several, say, anthology, they did with our church, and, a lot of stories from, mine's in there too, but
Right.
people's stories. So that's, but those are the kinds of books I wrote then originally. And so that's kind of that part of my life. And then I
Right.
became,
Right.
well known for that. And then I was asked to do a book on identity theft, because that was a topic that I had talked about, because I ended up writing more books. I wrote a book called Life After Debt, that was all about, now that you got all the great credit, now you're in debt. Like, how do you get out of that now? Because that's a whole
Right.
nother story.
Different
And then
steps
how
on
do
the
you,
path.
yeah, so I learned, just, and I would go through my own ups and downs too, because I had like a lot, and I
Right.
still with personal quote demons and
Yeah.
destructive things. So I'd have these really bad. I mean, I would be like on the Phil Donahue show. if you ever heard of him,
I
he's
have,
back
yeah,
there. Yeah, with,
100%.
during the, yeah, I wasn't, yeah. So I was like a guy
Yeah.
that, I got on all these talk shows and, worked for Capital One for a while. And, they interview me for all these news shows. Here's the latest statistics on identity theft, or here's the story of, people in debt. And here's our expert, Robert Hammond, who's da 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 book, da da da. And so I just, get my little spiels about it. And it's funny too, because with Capital One, they sponsored me to come out, to New York and to do a bunch of these news things. And they just said, all you have to do is you just have to whenever you're doing these interviews, and gives you a secret of how a lot of stuff works. It's
Yeah.
like they just say, just mention Capital One as you're within what you're saying.
Right.
And they gave me like 10 grand or whatever it was, and played my way out, and and I can legitimately say, and I said, yeah, and so a lot of credit cards like Capital One, et cetera, will now have things that will alert you, which is true. Will alert you if they think there's fraud on your account.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, I have credit cards and I have one from them too. I'm not, they're not paying me to say this now.
Right. That'd be some meta level
That would
stuff
be
right there.
super better. Yeah, no, Capital One, if you want to pay me, then I'll take it. But no, I don't work for, I don't work for anybody. Yeah, I don't take money for any of that stuff. But anyway,
That's
that was
funny.
how it works. And that's why a lot of news I do know that, brought to you by, fill in the blank, Pfizer or whoever, news is going to be slanted with particular things that are embedded in it, where
Right.
they're not necessarily even an ad. But yeah, they will, they have their quote experts. And now again, I was there, basically promote my books. I was, and they wanted me to promote it. And my
Yeah.
publisher had actually, requested me to write the book on that topic because nobody else had written one. So that was kind of what
Right.
my thing was. I was writing books of things that I wanted to know for myself, or that somebody else said, we need a book on this topic. Nobody else can do it. And you've got, this background, this background, this background. And then later on, I was in law school. So I was going to law school. I was going to be an attorney. And that was when I got the call from that identity theft book. I was like, okay, I'm working full time, going to law school at night. So yeah, I can't do, write a whole book and promote it. And so I
Right.
took my leave of absence from the law school. And then I started writing all these books. And then I did, start writing a screenplay based on my book on identity theft, because I learned this is during like 9/11 when that happened.
Yeah. Okay. So back in 2001.
Another
Wow.
Yeah, so that was when I wrote that book. And so, I mean, I actually that happened right in the middle of writing the books. I actually had to include that in there because, that was a part of the story. It's like, oh, these hijackers, they're using these fake IDs.
Oh, wow.
And so I had to show, which was interesting, and obviously I've learned a lot more about that topic, which I won't get into now. But it was interesting just to, as I'm at law school, and then when that happened, and I was
Yeah.
working with the government too, and then I was writing that book. So like three things were happening in my life when that happened. And it's like, it's a big, like the whole like, you've heard of like trauma-based mind control.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Operation, like Mockingbird and all these other things, which I
Mm-hmm.
was aware of those, but it hit, like a lot of things. Just like I said, I saw the Kennedy assassination. I mean,
Right.
was there in Dallas, but I'm saying I was around as a kid. That happened when I was in school that day,
Wow.
and they announced it over the intercom. And I went
Mm-hmm.
home, which I lived like 3 blocks away from it, went home from school, the president should have been shot, Walter Cronkite and all
Yeah.
these people. I mean, I literally
Mm.
remember that. And we were like, little 8-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And I remember going home and my mom was there making lunch, because I'd have lunch at home because I was like right around the corner. And I told her, she goes, oh, that's not true. And then she turns the TV on and sees it. And I mean, my mom literally fainted right there, which I'd never seen, where
Wow.
I'm like,
That's
whoa.
crazy.
I know, because it's like, you turn the TV on, yes,
That's
the president's
intense.
been shot, and you're like,
And then
whoa.
they
I mean, it's
show
like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they don't have the Bruder film or anything,
Right,
right
right, right,
then of
right.
this stuff
Right.
that happened, and they're
Yeah.
just showing, people talking about it and hearing about it, and some scenes
Yeah.
from the area. And so anyway, say 9/11, other things like that, King Martin Luther King, RFK, a lot of those are these things, and like I said, moon landing. A lot of these are like
Yeah.
group projects, not saying those are like all projects per se, but what I'm saying, they affect the
Yeah.
whole society at once with those strong emotions. And so I've always known the power of emotion, energy,
Mm.
images,
Mm.
words, and whether it's
Yeah.
very temptations to outrage, and you can manipulate those emotions, which is oftentimes the case. You're always like, okay, who should we hate now? Let's
Yeah.
all kill this group of people now, or let's
Yeah.
do go to war here, because of this person, this group, or this. And so I remember going through that, and I remember, like I said, when I went in the military, that's the first thing. Even though we're quote peacetime under Ronald Reagan, supposedly, we're like, yeah, we got to go against those Soviets. Here's their tactics. Here's their weapons. Here's why we're going to fight them when we need to, because they're doing
Right.
all these things. And they were, when we were fighting in Vietnam, they were the ones on the other side helping
Mm.
those groups.
Right.
So we're
Right. Right.
supposed to
Right.
hate them
Right.
because, we're both doing proxy wars in different countries
Right.
and like.
Exactly.
Anyway, but I don't know where it's going, all that craziness. I was saying that happened when I started writing those books, is that
Yeah.
was in the middle of it. And so that's
Yeah.
when I ended up quitting law school eventually, because I had to leave fast. I could have gone back. I'd done well, I was one of the top people in the class. But then I was like, after, you learn law enough. And I'd done well, the classes I had taken. Like in my first, I was in the second year. I was like, I thought I wanted to do this or that or this kind of law, this kind of law. But once you realize what it really is all about, it's a lot of
Right.
it's just you're sitting at a computer reading and researching and writing,
Mm.
which is what I was good at doing. But
Yeah.
it's not like, the TV, you're up in the courtroom and, arguing, very little bit of that will ever happen, in most law
Right.
work. And I was
Exactly.
like, oh, I don't want to work for the public defender's office. I used to think, oh, criminal law would be really great. But then it's like, okay, I don't really want to defend a bunch of perverts and killers and stuff.
Right.
And,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
even though I might want to help a person who's not guilty, but, be honest, most criminals that are not, they are guilty. So it's like, I
Right.
don't necessarily want to be, like getting somebody off of something that they did.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, I don't want to be like a prosecutor and like putting people in jail,
And then it could
even
be
if they
innocent.
are, yeah, even
Right.
if they
Yeah.
are guilty. I don't really want to like destroy people's lives like that.
Right.
And I don't really want to be in the middle of that world of criminals. And then I say, well, I definitely don't want to be in the world of divorce either, because you got,
Yeah. Oh.
they say that criminal laws is bad people at their best, because they're trying to act like they're, oh, me who me. And then the family law is like good people at their worst.
Right. Right.
You get
Right.
these, upstanding citizens, but they're like, "Ah, I'm gonna kill her. I'm gonna
Yeah.
call him all these names," and it's like, So anyway, I decided maybe it's not really what I really thought it was going to be, law. So I eventually came back to college. I had already had my undergraduate, psychology, sociology, liberal arts kind of stuff. I said, oh, maybe, what I really have been wanting to do was to, write. And, I had been writing those other books,
Right.
and so I'd been writing books, but then I was like, yeah, I'd really rather do more creative things. I love movies, and I love, maybe I'll write like for a TV show or a movie, or whatever.
That was
And
something I was going to ask is like, have you written, I know you've written books, but have you written screenplays or any music?
yeah,
Because your writing style has a very lyrical kind of style to it. I know you mentioned poetry. What
hmm
have you written
yeah,
and you mentioned a screenplay too. Have you written any music at all?
not really music. I have a book that I wrote years ago. It's a novel called The Light, by the way.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
that's it. It's a very lyrical, it's got actual poetry throughout it. It's very, more of a lyrical, spiritual journey type of thing. It was
Yeah.
before I was Orthodox. I wrote it, actually it started, decades ago, when I was actually doing some kind of introspective, writing, kind
Yeah.
of like 12-step type of processing, just stuff. So it
Yeah.
started with that, but then I changed it all. It's a novel, so it's not, 100%, like, oh, that's my life story.
Right.
But it's got a lot more of the lyrical things. But my if you go to, Robert Hammond or Robert John Hammond, on Amazon, you'll see like all these books I've written, for decades going back. But not to toot my horn on that, but I eventually, when I did go back to college, you asked about screenplays. I actually majored in creative writing. Screenwriting was my focus. I got a master's of fine arts in screenwriting, and I taught,
Nice.
in college. I was a professor, so, or adjunct. I taught, master's level creative writing, screenwriting, like thesis projects. And so, yeah, so my thesis paper, which was like to graduate from my master's degree, was a screenplay on Cecil B. DeMille, who was the big director who did all these original like biblical epics, like
Oh
the Ten
wow.
Commandments that used to
Oh, I
come
know the
on
Ten
every
Commandments.
year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh
with
yeah, that
Charlton Heston
totally,
and
dude. Yeah, yeah.
Yul
I know that
Brynner.
director. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know
Yeah, so
Charlton
that was his
Heston, of
last
course.
project. Yeah, so I wrote a screenplay that followed his life, because he was from New York, and like in the Broadway, music, or plays out there. He was kind of working in that realm back in the early 1900s,
Right.
and him and a couple of other of his friends who were in that, they wanted to do something different, so they came out to California, and this was like in like the early 1900s, and people were like, California, there's nothing there but orange groves and desert, it's nothing, which back then it
Right.
wasn't, and he's
Right.
like, but yeah, we want to do something different. So he actually like basically took the family silver collection and pawned that just so he'd have some money to go out. His wife and family were still there in New York because he didn't have money to just bring everyone out for this adventure, I mean,
Yeah.
to try to do something. And so they actually took one of these Broadway plays, and these top plays at the time, and said, we're going to film this. We're going to do a film stage play. Still, which we call now movies. And
Right.
back then, the word movie actually, and you've heard the name like Nickelodeon, like the TV, I mean
Yeah.
the network. That
Yeah.
was a Nickelodeon was literally a peep show that you go onto these boardwalks, like in different towns, and you put like a nickel in this thing, and you turn this little crank, and that was how they would show you a little quote movie. But they were very
Wow.
vulgar. Mostly they were like a stripper. Ooh, you pay
Right.
5 cents and watch. Nowadays, you got, this crazy stuff out there, but that was like as bad as it would
That's
get.
an
And, or
interesting
he's,
tidbit. That's an interesting tidbit considering some of the information that's come out about Nickelodeon recently. That's interesting.
yeah, so that's how it started. Nickelodeon was literally a device that you put a nickel in, turn a crank,
Hmm.
and you could see maybe a lion tamer. You see like, these little, how you could take pictures and make a bunch of them and you flip through them. It was, to make it look like it's moving. And it
Yeah.
was kind of like that, but these were like little film, cells, like they do with like early animation. You've
Yep.
seen like the early
Uh-huh.
Disney Mickey Mouse and stuff. But it
Totally.
was
Yeah.
like these
Yeah.
were real people, picture real images, from like the camera, like from Edison, because Edison was like in charge of, so Edison, and that's a whole story there, the Edison Trust. He basically, captured in, a whole story about Tesla.
Yeah.
Edison
Yeah.
basically kind
Nikolai
of,
Tesla. Yeah.
yeah, he kind of took, who's an Orthodox, Serbian
Yeah.
Orthodox
Yeah.
Christian,
He
by the
comes
way.
from an Orthodox lineage, and
Yeah.
yeah, no, there's some interesting stuff there that I've
Yeah,
spoken
it's a whole
about
nother story
before.
there too. But
Uh-huh.
Edison basically kind of took a lot of his work, because he was into all kinds of, really deep, energy, free energy and all kinds of
Totally. Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
Morgans, from Morgan Chase, they're like, no, we don't want that free
Mm.
energy. We need the kind that you can pay people. People have to pay for us. So we need, and we have copper mines too, so we need more copper wire to be
Right.
sold, and we don't want anything to just go through the space, anyway. But that is,
Yeah.
I can go on so many rabbit holes. It's crazy, and I did a lot of that type of stuff too. Actually, one of my first documentaries I did was on Bohemian Grove, if you've ever heard of
Oh,
that.
what? You did a documentary on Bohemian Grove?
Yeah, it's called Illuminati. That
Illuminati. That sounds awesome. I gotta
was,
look that one
yeah,
up,
you can
man. That
find it. It's
sounds
actually on
cool.
YouTube. You have to kind of dig for
Okay.
it. It's like Bilderberg West and Bohemian Grove is kind of like the subtitle of it, with
Okay.
Anthony Hilder, who I met. I met him up in Bohemian Grove years ago. The whole story
That's
there
cool.
too. I was up, that group Anonymous,
Yeah,
it's
I've
with
heard
the
of them,
mask
yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were, I don't know what really happened. I think they're compromised, COINTEL type
for
of
sure.
thing.
Yep.
But they were,
That's what I
they
always
would
thought.
do, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, at the time I was like, yeah, I was just looking at, YouTube, and they
Yeah.
were up there saying, with their masks and stuff, and
Right.
talking
With the
about,
thing from like that one movie, I can't remember the name. But
yeah,
yeah.
V for Vendetta.
Yeah, exactly. That one. That's the one. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, Guy Fawkes masks.
Yeah, there's some interesting things about that movie, but yeah, like that's a
Yeah,
whole
that's a
rabbit
whole
hole in
other
itself
story.
right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So no, I'm into a lot of these old movies, Matrix, etc. A lot of this is
Oh yeah,
very
Matrix, that's a
Gnostic
good one.
and a lot of other stuff that goes on there
It's
behind the
interesting what
scenes too.
happened to the Matrix directors. The Wachowski brothers are
Oh,
now the
yeah, don't
Wachowski
even get me
sisters,
started.
right? I don't
I
even
know
think
that's
that's a whole
I
thing
know
right
first
there.
one and then the other one, and okay,
I
now
like
it's
the
like,
first
okay.
one, and then as it
The
kept
first one was
going, I
good. It
felt like
got
it kept getting further and further from what it originally was.
Yeah, no,
You
it was
know?
really one that you could have done the one, and that would have been like that was so mind blowing
Yeah,
by
it was
itself.
really good.
But yeah, they kind of jumped the shark, so to speak, with
Yeah, they did
2 and
something happen
3.
there.
And I mean, I watched all those 3 too, but
I
then
watched
I
them all.
did
Oh yeah,
see,
I watched them. Yeah, I was like, no, they're
yeah,
gonna get it right this time. No, they didn't. You know?
yeah. No, the first one got it right, and that was
Oh
pretty
yeah.
much you leave it. But it's hard not to do that when people are offering you millions and millions of dollars. Oh, you did so much, you got to do a
Mm,
sequel. I mean, there's some
right.
movies and stories that are built in with sequels. I mean, Star Wars was written with like several stories already written.
Exactly.
James
Yeah.
Bond, as a series of
Yep. Yep.
characters. Those are
Yeah.
very different
They
than
are.
some things. It's just such a mind-blowing thing in itself. It's not always easy to just say, oh, I'm a Superman. Of course you can, make stories. But again,
Yeah.
unfortunately Hollywood has pretty much destroyed all these franchises because then they start trying to add in all these agendas to them.
Right.
And then it's like you keep
Right.
on say, well, let's just take the same character, but let's make this guy a woman, let's make this person a this or that, and just
Mm.
you're
That
just doing
reminds.
it just to be doing it. Like, wait a minute,
That
it's
reminds me.
okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. That reminds me of a comedy sketch my friend just made where they're they're they have a comedy show called Ortho Thugs. It's a little silly, but they
Oh,
they go
okay,
into they go into Netflix. They go into like these Netflix executives, and he's like has this idea, and he's like, yeah, there's this young guy and this young boy and his father. He's like, he doesn't have a father, and is it, and then it goes on the
right.
executives, and it's like, no, it's got a mom, but she's lesbian or something. Like, they just keep throwing in these unnecessary like little parts of
You
the
can,
story, and the guy's trying to like present his story the way he wrote it. And he's like, okay, I guess. It just cracks me up because
it's
I
funny,
feel like
yeah,
that there might be something like that going on behind the scenes. At least it seems like that. I'm not behind the scenes, but it
yeah.
seems
No,
like
there
there's something
is.
like that going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, yeah, with a lot of these big franchise, and companies, like, and I don't want to, I mean, I can name names. I mean, obviously, Netflix and Disney, and they're big, companies. So it's like
Right.
the people who are running them, they're, obviously about money too, but and just to keep pushing people into their realms, so to speak. But a lot of it, you have some really good stories that were out there that are just not as good because you've just kind of watered them down and taken so many different things you're trying to add into it. That's like, okay, that's no longer what, Snow White's about, this story, this concept, this type of person, and this kind of a dream, of a whatever story, happily ever after. And when you just try to take everything and subvert it and say, oh, let's just turn it all upside
Mm,
down and make it
right.
about this, agenda or that agenda, then it's like you're just kind of trying to preach to people. And then back to, like with Orthodox and Christian films, even, you know, um, I think the key here, because you were asking about, screenwriting. I mean, that was my
Yeah.
first movie script was about Cecil B. DeMille, and
Oh
it was
wow.
that his story of coming to California back in those days. It was this orange groves and desert, with
Right.
kind of this faith of like, oh, we're going to try to do this, and then you got the Edison Trust, and kind of after them, because it's like, oh, you guys got to use our equipment, and you're going to,
Mm,
pay us all this money, and we're owning everything. And so
right.
that's how they got as far out west as they did, because everything was back in like New Jersey and New York. That's
Interesting.
where Edison was. So anyway, so that's how that
That's cool.
California came about. And then that became Hollywood. And so he started making these movies,
Wow.
which again, when people used to hear the word movies, they thought that's a Nickelodeon. That's a 5 minute little quick,
Interesting.
stripper, or, a locomotive, or,
Yeah.
mountain like tamer type of little, you know 5 minute little reel, basically. So
Right.
now he's making these feature length, I mean, like an hour long thing, and so it became like a spectacle, which nobody had seen that except
Yeah.
for like an actual play, in like Broadway or somewhere. So
Exactly.
that became the big thing. And he was doing a lot of, like just stuff that was already out there, these plays. And anyway, so that's the movie is about that. But then he has like a spiritual experience in the middle of it because again, he's in the decadent world of Hollywood, which is
Mm,
wasn't really Hollywood at the time as we know it now, but
right.
it became that.
Mm,
And there were actually,
gotcha.
it's funny that the town Hollywood, which we have questions on, how did they come up with that name Hollywood? Is it like, from witchcraft, etc.?
Right.
Or there's also a story that the person, there was like a little town or a little development back east somewhere, and they actually were going to they wanted to create a little alcohol-free little Christian community, far
Interesting.
away from all everything. And that's what this little town actually was originally going to be. Well, we have no alcohol and we don't do these things. And so we're going to be,
Interesting.
like a nice little dry, how they have those dry towns and they quote what they call blue laws, where it's like on Sundays you
Right.
can't have anything open, etc. And that's what some of the people who started that little community wanted. And there were
Wow.
actually, when Hollywood movie type of people started coming out and they started building these studios. I mean, he built this first studio was like in an old horse stable. I mean, there was literally horses
Oh, wow.
right there at a barn. And he's like, okay, over here, we're going to get our cameras up here. We got our,
Humble beginnings
you know,
there. Wow.
yeah. Yeah. So that was my first screenplay was that. And I got a lot of attention for it. And I worked as a creative executive for, literary, screenwriting. As I used to read screenplays and analyze them and do all that stuff. So that's my
Yeah.
background is doing that. And then I
Awesome.
came out to the Bay Area, I started doing some short films and working on, that's how I got that thing I
Oh yeah,
said with the
I was gonna ask you what inspired you to make the documentary American Orthodox. I think that would probably be a good time to bring that up, considering
oh
where we're at.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. Yeah, that was
because that was
finally
really I really enjoyed that where you came to our parish and showed that. I thought it was really
mhm.
well done. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. By the way,
Yeah, no, I appreciated it, and I appreciate people, in any parish, as I've said before, they just send us, AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com is our website. They go
nice.
there, contact us. We can send the link, and so they can watch it, for free in a parish,
Oh,
and that's
nice.
really the best way of watching it is like in that kind of environment. Some people will donate if they want to, but a lot of times you can use it as a fundraiser. You're saying, you want to have a movie night for, like I'm doing with like the OCF
Right.
next week. In a
Nice.
couple weeks, I'll be going up to Portland, for like they're having a pan-Orthodox group and they're going to have a movie night. And then
Nice.
next month we're going to Dallas. Dallas, they're having a in Carrollton, Texas, on this I
Okay.
think Valentine's Day. They're going to have yeah, Justin Marler's going to be there.
Very cool.
A bunch of other people are going to be there. It's an Orthodox art and food festival.
That sounds cool. Yeah,
So
Justin
yeah,
Marler,
so
the
anyway,
original creator of Death to the World. Yeah, cool.
yeah, yeah. So he'll be there, other people will be there, doing all kinds of food. And so our film is actually going to be showing there as the film aspect of the arts and things. So anyway,
Nice.
how I wrote it or I came up with it, that's why I wrote the book and the
Right.
trilogy basically, which includes Voice in the Wilderness and Light Journey, is because I had been, studying the saints and I've been studying Orthodoxy. And once I had become Orthodox, and I remember
Right.
mentioning back with my own story where I went to the not film festival, but the Greek
The Greek.
festival.
Yeah.
And that actually ended up being, years later, when I started to look, I'd kind of gotten away from all churches. I was like, nah, I'm tired of organized religion and all
Mm.
these
Yeah.
different,
I went through a
denominations,
place like
etc.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one day I just happened to click on YouTube looking for something. I don't even know what I was looking for, some mysticism or something I was into.
Right.
And I saw something about the ancient church and the Christian mysticism, and it actually mentioned Eastern Orthodoxy. And I'm like, wait,
Nice.
what's that again? And so I was like, never even heard of it really, I don't think. And then I clicked eventually as I looked into it, I go, wow, this looks really interesting. Very, mystic, Christianity or whatever. And
Yeah.
so I just Googled and said, I wonder if there's an Orthodox church near me. Here I am in the Bay Area. I had no clue. It's like,
Right. The
like,
history.
wow.
Talk
Yeah,
about,
wow,
yeah.
we got all
Yeah.
these churches, and so I was like, wow, that's interesting. I wonder what they're like, And I started reading, watching some videos, Callisto, Metropolitan Callisto Ware, and there was a few at the time. This is like we're talking 2016.
Mm. Okay.
That's when I started looking into Orthodox. That's when I actually became Orthodox that year later. And I
Wow.
remember, my wife and I, we had gone to that Greek festival years before that and hadn't even thought about it, they're on the religious aspect as far as, joining the church or anything. And
Right.
when I remember asking her, and this is in the movie, so spoiler alert, this little me telling this little story. I mean, because I'm talking tell it there, but I was like, hey, to my wife Lisa, what was that Greek festival we went to that time? We ought to go to one of those again. Because now I'm like thinking, oh, Greek festivals or Greek Orthodox. Let's check that out.
Yeah.
And she goes, and I was like, where was that one that we went to that one time? We should go to one of those. She goes, that's the church you're going to. I'm like, what? So I'd actually started
Wow.
going to church, at a Greek Orthodox church, a cathedral in Oakland called
Wow.
Ascension Cathedral. Because I had looked at a lot of different ones, and that was people were saying, "Oh, this is a really a good one," because the priest has been there for like 30 something years. He's very educated. He's very, very friendly, and the people are really friendly, and a lot of people from different backgrounds. So you don't have to be Greek, that
Right,
was the first thing when
right.
I started looking at Orthodox. They go, "Okay, Serbian this, Romanian this,
Mm-hmm.
Bulgarian, Russian, Greek." I'm like, "Wait a minute,
Yeah.
I'm not any of those. What?"
Yeah.
To me, it'd be like saying, "Oh, you should go to the Korean Presbyterian Church." Like,
Right.
why would I think of going to something with a name like that? I mean, maybe the
Yeah.
most beautiful service of all, but you know what I mean. Just by on the surface, you think,
Makes
okay,
sense.
well, if I was,
Yeah.
a Korean or a Presbyterian, maybe I'd go to Korean Presbyterian, but I'm not,
Exactly.
Serbian, Bulgarian, etc. Anyway, so that's where I started going to church, and there was like really beautiful people. My godfather's Greek. I got baptized in the church there.
Oh, thanks be to
And
God.
then it
Yeah.
was like, yeah, 4 days after I got baptized, I got a job interview. And I'm in the Bay Area, Walnut Creek, on the East Bay over near Berkeley and stuff.
Right. Right.
And so I get a job interview, and it's on December 7th. Coincidentally, that was the date of the St. Catherine's Day that I just went to recently.
Oh,
But anyway,
wow. Interesting.
I
There's a little
yeah,
little
a day
something.
that'll live in infamy. I went to that interview, and it was for the Department of Veterans Affairs for the state, which I said I didn't know the state had that. I know there's a federal VA, but yeah,
Right.
it's like a state department. I did work for the state. It's like I said, I've been in government work and doing different things for many years, off and on. Even though I taught, college, and I did a few other things. Had my own business. I was trying to be a Hollywood producer in the meantime,
Wow.
which was not working out at the time. I was like, okay, I thought this deal that I'd signed was going to have $250,000. It says it right here. It says, yeah, that's when we start production. I'm like, oh, I thought you guys
Mm.
were going to start. That was like 3 years ago. It's like,
Wow.
they say Hollywood's the one place where you can die of encouragement.
Right. I bet. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah, because they're always,
tricky.
yeah, you're so good. Yeah, well, yeah, we're gonna do this and this and this. And it's like, yeah, just come on. And it's like, yeah,
They
years
hype
later,
you
you're
up and
like,
keep leading you along with like a
yeah, it's
carrot
like
on a
that
string kind of
skeleton,
thing,
with the
right?
the spider web coming out here. And while you're waiting,
Yeah.
where's
Yeah,
my
no.
check?
Right? Yeah.
So
That's
anyway,
crazy.
that's how I came into I was in the church, and then I got the job interview, and then it was like in Sacramento, and I got offered that job. And I was like, Lisa, my wife, she's like, well, that's a long way to commute from Walnut Creek to Sacramento. It's like 70 miles. It's like, I can't do that
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah, no,
So
no.
she goes, well,
Yeah.
maybe we should think about moving. I'm like, moving again, and you know how moving
Right.
is. I'm sure you've
Yes.
done it more than
Especially with
once.
10,000 tapes. Lord have mercy.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I got all my books, right, and
And the
everything.
books and tapes are so they're both
I know they're
very
so heavy.
heavy when
Yeah,
you put them in boxes.
exactly. I don't care about the clothes, and I mean, I
Oh
gave away
man.
a lot of stuff too. But anyway,
Yeah.
so that's how I
Yeah.
got out here, and so that's how so once I came out here, then I started, like learning more other churches, because we've got literally 14 Orthodox churches in our area
Oh,
within the,
awesome.
the, the Sacramento
Righteous.
area. Yeah.
Righteous.
So I started going to different ones. I was closest to the one where I go now, Elevation Holy Cross, that's OCA church. They
Nice.
speak English, and it was just
Yep.
really family oriented. I felt
Mm.
really at home there. And then, but I spent a lot of time with a lot of other churches, because then once
Yeah.
you start learning about it, you say, "Oh, here's this one. Let me go here." So I spent a lot of time with
Exactly.
Russian Orthodox Church. I mean, even started like
Yep.
learning a little bit of Russian, and like I said, we
Nice.
have Greek Orthodox, and like I said, my godfather's Greek. And so I
Very
still go
cool.
back there sometimes. And then I had two godchildren who became baptized, and they were both former Protestants as well, adults. And they got baptized here at our church here. And we have some really good Serbian churches, including, the monastery up there in Platina, which is technically under
Right.
Serbian jurisdiction now, even though it was under the Russian when Father Seraphim Rose was there. So that was one of the
Exactly.
things that
Yeah.
happened when I first started coming to the church that I went to now. Speaking of just kind of the connections, is there's I was just there like a Vesper service and sitting there, and I didn't know anybody, and I saw a guy, and his name's Tim Honeycutt,
Oh
and he
wow,
has,
I know who you're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, and he has, the Orthodox Wisdom channel, which I don't think he had that at the time, and I didn't know who he was. He's just a regular guy. He's a nice guy, really nice guy, smart
Yeah,
guy, and so I just was like, oh hi, I'm new, and he's, oh okay, and I go, yeah, I just came from I just got a job out here in Sacramento, so I just started to come here. And then I walk away, we're doing best for service. And then I was like, and I had just started reading Sarah from Rose's books right before, I moved out here, out to
yeah,
where I am. And I just walked back over to says, oh, are you familiar with Sarah from Rose by any chance? He goes, oh yeah, I'm really, I read a lot of those books, Nihilism, and that. And then we started talking briefly. And okay, yeah, I just started reading it. And he's like,
that's
I'm really, it's
amazing.
really deep. And then I walk away again, and then he walks over to me again. Like it's kind of like we're all like both, standing, and it was like a service, but it's pretty casual because evening service, not a lot of people there, and people kind of
Right,
wander around a little bit.
exactly. Yep, totally.
And yeah, anyway, so he walks back to it and he goes, "Oh, speaking of Sarah from Rose, he proposed on September 2nd, and a lot of us go up there to the monastery in Platina, on that day, and so some of us are going to go up there. And I'm talking, this is like in the summer, so it's like a couple of months away from that. I
Right,
forget
right.
when I was there, probably maybe late spring or whatever, when I had just moved out there. And so I was like, "Oh, really?" And he goes, "Oh, September 6th." So anyway, so that's how, planted the seed of, oh, maybe I'll check that out. And so that's like his 3-hour drive from here, from Sacramento, right at the five, freeway
Nice.
up past, Redding and all that. And
Yeah,
so that was the first time I went there, and I was like, oh, so I was blown away. Just went there for the day, went for liturgy, and then you go to the tour. You see the old printing presses. And see, here's
nice.
this little cell, his little cabin,
Yeah,
and it's just the experience of it was just so mind blowing. And by that time, I'd read like at least two or three of his books. Maybe more. I read
nice.
his life and works. Back then,
Yeah,
I could get the full volume of
right. Because now
that.
they're like out of print. A lot of
Right.
them.
They're working on, I know Abbott Damascene's still working
Oh,
on
okay.
revising
Cool.
it. Eventually it'll be out again. Just like the Creation
Good.
Early Man came out recently.
Yes.
But
Yeah, exactly. I still
yeah,
need
so
to
that's
read
how,
that one.
so with all that going on, and then we would go to Fort Ross, so that was the other thing. We went to Fort Ross, like
Yeah,
our one church goes there on like on the 4th of July every year, and another church goes up there every Memorial Day. And so I went with
nice.
different churches, with Rocor, with OCA, and just, I'd gone on my own a few times, and so I got to know people there, and I started learning about those stories, and I was like, wow, so blown away. So, and I kind of was sort of done with Hollywood by this time. I was like, okay, so sick of, all the stuff that I'd gone through with the Hollywood realm. I quit
Yeah,
teaching, college.
right,
And so I was just saying, I'm just going to go and work for, do my job with the state, and that's it.
right,
And then,
right.
so I was just doing church and going to monasteries, visiting different places,
Very
and
cool.
down
Very
to,
cool.
there's one like in Dunlap, and I'd been
Oh yeah,
there,
yeah,
and
yeah. I just went there recently. That
oh,
one
it's
was
beautiful.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Life-giving
beautiful.
springs. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that was awesome. Great experience there.
So that's been my, so I started just doing things like that, going to the cathedrals and different feast days and different
Nice.
churches, Calistoga,
Oh
another
wow.
really beautiful one.
I haven't been
And
there, but that's
so,
awesome.
oh yeah. So what finally happened, just to, getting to the point of this film, American Orthodox, I had started writing a
Yeah,
lot of this stuff down, a lot of these stories, and I'd done this book on journeys to Orthodoxy. It was called Roads Less
right.
Traveled. And so I
Ah,
was like, oh, there's so many stories here. And there's more that after that book came out, that I was like, oh, I wish I had gotten this story or this person's story, because it's like about conversion stories.
exactly. I
And
love conversion stories to Orthodoxy.
yeah, and that's was what made me start thinking about it. And I was writing all these lives of the saints I started learning about, and I'd been to all these different places. And so I was like, wow, pilgrimages and monasteries and all this history, and again, you learn all this history that, like, oh, I grew up in California. They didn't teach me anything about, the Russians in California. It's like, what?
Right.
Or all these different native tribes doing different things, and coming from
Exactly.
Alaska,
Yep.
and all that stuff. And so I learned a lot about that. And then I remember seeing Sacred Alaska, a couple of years ago
Wow.
when that
Yeah, yeah,
first came
yeah.
out. And then I met the director there, and we saw, that movie. I was just so blown away by that. I had seen Man of God before that, and that was,
Mm-hmm.
very
Another good one, Saint
life-changing,
Nectarios.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, director Yelena Popovich. He was
Mm-hmm.
doing the new Moses the Black movie coming out soon.
Right,
So anyway,
right.
so that was in the back of my mind when I started thinking again about, wow, these are such great movies. I didn't think at the time of me doing anything like that. But after I'd seen Sacred Alaska, then it's like about a month or so later, we were in Great Lent, and then we had a service called the Holy Unction service,
Oh
where
wow.
they have,
I
they
sure
anoint
I'm
people with
very
oil.
familiar with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was like, we had like 7 priests, this was at the
A lot
Holy
of miraculous
Ascension.
healings happen with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen, these mercy streaming icons. I've seen a lot of miracles and things like that. And so I
Yeah.
went to that service. There were like 7 priests. There was a bishop there.
Wow.
Um, and some a lot of friends that I had, here in Sacramento. And so I remember walking out of there just, just drenched with like oil and
Yeah.
myrrh and the Holy Spirit. And I was like, and I'm
Yeah.
walking out and I'm just talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, oh, this is so much amazing. And I remember Sacred Alaska was such a good movie, and we started talking about that. I go, we ought to do one about, or I didn't say we ought to do one. I said somebody ought to do one about, there should be a Sacred California, because we've got so many saints here. We've got
Yeah.
Fort Ross, we've got Platina, all this different. So that was what the seed was like in my mind right from walking out of that Holy Unction service, and we were talking about it. He goes, "Oh yeah, that'd be a great idea. It'd be so many saints and all this stuff. Saint Peter the Aleut and Saint Innocent, Saint John of San Francisco, and all these names that most
Totally.
people have never heard of. Saint Sebastian and Jackson, and out
Exactly.
there. And then my other priest, Father Timothy, who's at Holy Cross, where I go now, he walks out,
Nice.
and I was just telling, yeah, I was just talking to Peter, who's, by the way, named after Saint Peter the Aleut, and he's a Native American, who I
Nice.
saw come into the church, and I saw him get baptized, and I saw him take that name. So anyway, I'm talking to him, and then my priest comes walking out talking about coincidence, right? Quote. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
and I was like, yeah, I was talking to Peter. We were just talking. I said, Sacred Alaska was so great, and he had seen it too. Everybody, had, a lot of people had seen it, and I said, yeah, they had to do like a Sacred California movie, about all the saints here. And then he goes, well, yeah, you ought to do that. I'm like, well,
You're
it
like,
kind
wait,
of like
what?
caught me off guard. They were saying me. I said,
Wait, me?
oh,
I thought
okay,
I meant somebody else.
yeah, I think they,
Right?
they are right.
Oh,
It's
yes. Oh man.
yeah.
That's
Anyway,
hilarious.
so that's so that's the scene was in my mind there. I was like, and then so anyway, so I talked to a couple other people just about that idea. Say, oh, what do you think about a movie about California, sacred California? And they're like, oh, that's a great idea, and people talk. And then I remember talking to a good friend, and she was like, well, that's a great idea. I don't know about that for a title, Sacred California. Those two words don't seem to fit
Right, right.
together
They don't flow
as
very well
well.
together.
So she goes, what about like Orthodox California? I go, oh, maybe that might work. And I was just thinking about, like what would be a title if I was going to come up with a title.
Yeah.
And then I just thought more about it. I go, yeah, it's actually a bigger story than just California. I said, it's like, and then that's when the American Orthodox, it hit me as a title.
Yeah.
And I had already been doing a lot, I've been reading all the lives of the saints of North America. And I'd read, a lot of videos out there. And I knew, obviously about Sarah from Rose and a lot of these other things, St. John of San Francisco, who I think actually helped me get out here. That's a whole nother story there. I'd gone to the
Yeah.
cathedral, prayed about my Hollywood career. God help me, please, St. John, help me get my career on track, because I was like unemployed for a period of time. And
Yeah.
then, long story short, that was right before I got, baptized into the church. And then I got the job interview in Sacramento. So that's, I believe St.
Wow.
John was part of
Interceding
helping
there a little
me,
bit. Yeah.
interceding for me. Yeah, exactly. Along with my now patron saint, St. John, the theologian, so
Oh wow.
um,
Thanks be
yeah,
to
so
God.
thank you for, and then growing up in Santa Maria, so St. Mary, she's been there for us.
From the get.
So, yeah, so that's, I think all those things kind of came together. And so American
Definitely.
Orthodox was just all these lives, the saints in North America was really the idea. And I thought, oh, I could include, not, just, Fort Ross. Talk about the cathedral, St. John of San Francisco. I could go into St. Sebastian Jackson, which, those are in there. But I thought,
Yeah.
oh, you could also go into, Arizona, Elder
St.
Ephraim,
Raphael
and
of Brooklyn.
yeah, St. Raphael. Exactly. There's so many
Yeah. So
wonderful,
many.
amazing saints in North America that so I started writing all these things down, kind of like as like outlines and documentaries. And I write, like I said, screenwriting is my background. So,
Nice.
like you've seen like the movie Rocky, right?
Oh yeah, I love Rocky.
Sylvester
Oh
Stallone. He
man.
wrote that in 2 days. He
Yeah,
wrote that
that's
script in.
That's
Yeah.
insane to me too. He did so much in that movie. Got into great shape,
Mhm.
starred in it, wrote
Right.
it. I think he directed it too, if
Exactly.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah. He did.
Like,
He
dude,
did pretty
you know,
much everything. I don't think he
people
directed
think.
it, but he
Okay, gotcha.
starred in
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he's that was his condition. He says,
yeah.
people wanted to buy it and do it, but they wanted, he had other actors because he wasn't even well known at the time. He didn't,
Right, right.
anyway. So that was kind of like an inspiration too, Da, 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 da.
Yeah,
And so,
no, Rocky's
and so
so
I
good. I
write
love that.
fast.
I love that
And
franchise.
screenplays, yeah, they're very different. So when you read my books, which you have, or
Yes.
started to, they're
Hmm.
not written like academic, as you know, like I
Yeah,
don't
no,
have
I
all these
like it. I like the
footnotes.
style. The style. I was reading. I was like, man, this reminds me of how I like write a hip hop song, kind of,
Yeah, it's
but different.
freestyle. Yeah.
It
So
was
that's how I
like it was
did it. I
very
just
creative and
flow.
lyrical. Yeah.
Yeah, you get in the flow state, and that's kind of what I
Yes.
do when I write. I just like I'm seeing images, and so when I knew
Yeah, I
about
could
Fort
feel it.
Ross, I was like, okay, I knew the story. I knew Robin Innocentia, who's like the main character. No, she's not a character. She's an actual subject, a real person, who was like the
Wow.
historian, of Fort Ross, and she had been there for 30 years, and she ended up losing her job, and
Wow.
she was all down and out. And she told me all this because I knew her personally, and I still know her personally. We're really good friends. And
Yeah.
she was telling me about how, she had gotten laid off of the job and didn't know what she was going to do. And this was like 2016, same time I came in the church, right around that time. She
Hmm.
was walking along the beach there. Her days were numbered as far as she's already been laid off. Was waiting for her last day and walking along the beach on Fort Ross, which is up by Bodega Bay for anyone who doesn't know, Northern California.
Hmm.
And we're seeing something kind of glistening in the sand in the water there. It's like, oh man, somebody threw some trash out there. And she's very, environmentally conscious, very,
Right.
conscious as person. And so, she was like a park ranger and a historian. So she, kind of knew that, oh, I want to make sure this stays pristine. And she
Right.
goes over there to think where she saw some trash. And she started looking, and it's like half buried in the sand. And it's an icon, of St. Peter the Aleut.
Wow.
And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a whole
That's
story that goes on
insane.
that. So the
Yeah.
movie focuses, that's a centerpiece of the movie. The whole movie's
I
not just
remember
about
that. Yeah,
that.
I remember that in the American
But that
Orthodox.
image
That
stuck in my mind.
yeah, I
And then
bet
as I
it
started
did.
doing more research, I researched more about, history of Fort Ross, history
Hmm.
of the Orthodoxy in California. And then you really start with like Sacred Alaska. So that was like the inspiration was
Right.
those natives and people that came there like in the 1700s there, and then they
Exactly.
came down California in 1812, and I think, wait a minute, 1812, where have I heard that number, that name, that year before? And I was like, oh, there's the War of 1812, and then there's the 1812 overture. And so it just kind of like that number clicked, and that was like California, the church, Orthodox people, including these saints like St. Peter and the Aleut and the Russian company, which was basically like a fur trading company. They were like a commercial,
Oh wow.
monopoly basically. But that was when they came there. So I just thought about, the imagery of the 1812 overture, that music. If anyone knows it, it's like what's got the cannons at the end, da, 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 boom, 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 boom. But it starts out very slowly and very, mystically. And then I started
Mm.
researching that music, the 1812, because I mean, it used to be one of my favorite, it's like 4th of July, you got to play that one,
Right,
And even
right.
though it's like 1812 overture, it's not an American, war, but it was like, an interesting, the music that goes with it, Tchaikovsky. And
Yes.
so then I found out there's a choral version of it. The beginning part of the 1812 overture is the Troparion of the Cross.
Wow.
God save thy people, bless thine inheritance. And I'm like, wait, what? Again, mind
Wow.
blowing.
Yeah.
So that just, tied into Robin finding this icon on the beach. And then I flash back in my mind. This is how my crazy mind works.
Right.
It's like, you say, these are freestyling
I got a weird mind
images.
myself. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I
So I
think the
know.
image is finding this beach
Hmm.
icon, and then it's like, oh, then you look out in the water and you think, oh, flashback 1812, and you hear 1812 overture, the music. And you look off, you see this big sailing ship, all these different masts and sails. You look
Wow.
closer, zero in on it. This is off the California coast, and then you see Russian flags. You're like, what are these guys doing here? We're being invaded or something.
Right.
And anyway, so I think that's like just pretty dramatic, just in and of itself. And then once you
That's
learn the
awesome.
story and you see that, yeah, there were saints that were coming during that period of time, and Saint
Definitely.
Innocent, Saint. Pecan, St. John, and St. Sebastian of Jackson, who's Serbian Orthodox faith, but he was he was like American born. And so
Right.
just learning all these stories, an American born, first American born priest, he became an Orthodox priest years later. And he was one of the greatest missionaries. Most people, like I said, myself, I never heard of any of these people.
Right.
I don't
Right.
know, growing up, how many people, who's St. Sebastian, who's
Exactly.
St. John of San Francisco. I mean, that's like a
Right. That's
crazy
another one.
idea that there's a great saint in San Francisco, and he's right there, literally, physically right
Yeah.
there. And St.
John,
Sebastian's right there.
yeah, so we got like 8 minutes left because I have 2 hours of time to use on this
Sure.
on StreamYard. So I guess probably wrapping it up. Is there
Okay.
any final thoughts you want to leave the people with? Just kind of bringing it all together, and is there anything you want to
Yeah,
leave the people with?
sure.
Final words, final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I really encourage people, creative people like yourself, and whether artists, writers, others, filmmakers, etc. Number one, get a blessing. Get the priest and the church involved, and ask them, what do you think about different things, and then they'll help encourage you, because it's always,
Right.
I think, better to do things within that environment, because I found
Yeah.
they're the ones that I've worked with, or who I'm working with now, they're so supportive of it. They
Right.
want, people who have skills and abilities, because people are good at all kinds of things. Just like I said, I went to the Greek festival. If it wasn't for that food and that
Yeah.
music, I might not be
Yeah.
here today, because it was like, that's so
Right.
wonderful. Yeah. And
That'll
so,
get you. Yeah, the Greek
people
food will get
do,
you.
yeah, do the thing that God's given you to do, like they talk about the talents, we're given.
Yeah.
And like I said, I have like some ability to write and make
Yeah, you
movies,
definitely do.
and I'm trying to do what I can do. Like I said, I've kind of fought it for a while. I mean, it was kind of like, I won't say forced on me, because my first book, as I talk about credit, it was like, because I got really bad credit. How do I get out of this? And I'm trying to solve
Right.
a problem. And so
Yeah.
same thing with these projects here. Like, I'm thinking, well, here's a problem. We need a story about California and the saints here, and that was
Yeah.
where it started. I go, wait a minute, we got all these saints here. Now we got like Saint Sarah from Rose, and we've got, you know, others people, and we've got people like Brother Jose Minos and the Merce Streaming Icons of Montreal
Yes.
and
Yes.
Hawaii. And it's ones I talk about in my other book, Light Journey. And so I'm looking at, I really love, like there's people like, like Father Turbo Qualls, for example,
Yeah,
who
he's
we both
great. He's
know.
great.
And yeah,
So
he's got
good.
that Synaxis of Sophia,
Mm-hmm.
group. And so I think it's amazing. And then there's a group I'm working with now called Logo Cinema.
Interesting. Yeah,
And
I've seen them.
yeah, they are just getting ready to launch, and they want to include as a streaming service, an Orthodox Christian streaming service, because
Cool.
like I said, there's a lot of, quote, Christian movies, some are, better than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, movies like Man of God, a movie like The Island, Ostrov,
Yes.
and the upcoming, Yelena in Sacred Alaska, again, those were the things that
Yes.
inspired me. So I hope that American Orthodox, and I encourage everyone to go to, the YouTube video, just the trailer of it's got like 1 million views already.
Wow.
So
That's
that's
awesome.
telling me that there are people who are interested, and that's just like a 2-minute,
Definitely.
teaser of, American Orthodox. So you can find that on YouTube, but go to our
Glory to
site,
God.
AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com. And
AmericanOrthodoxFilm.com. Okay, awesome.
yeah, and you can, find out more about the film. And then if you want to have your priest or your church or your school, seminaries, etc., or groups, even like, OCF groups, and, like
Yeah.
Ancient Faith, they're screening it out there, like their women's
And
conference.
I'll definitely put some links in the description below. Anything you want me to add in there, feel free to let me know, because we'll
Yeah.
add those after, just so people can have easy access
Okay.
to all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are, I mean, that's, to me, the thing about it is, obviously, we've talked a little bit about like God's providence. And
Right.
so a lot of things that happen in life are not things that we necessarily plan.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes our best plans are, like they say, it's the way of making God laugh. It's like, oh, ha, 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 you think you're gonna do this,
Right.
and be Mr. Big Shot XYZ, Hollywood
Yeah.
producer, or Mr., whatever.
Yeah.
And you never know, God, if he's given you gifts and abilities, whether it's communication skills, whether it's musical skills, whether it's cooking skills,
Mm.
administrative. I mean, I have so many
Right.
great
Right.
people who are so good at just organizing stuff and making stuff happen, or just even keeping track of things. I mean, there's a lot of
Hmm.
things that people don't necessarily glorify because they're so behind the scenes. Just like even
Yeah,
when I was in the military, most people who are in the military are not on the front line. And so, you
exactly.
appreciate, the people who are really, holding off things. Hopefully, that's what they're actually doing, something that's positive as far
Hmm.
as preventing invasions, which is what should be, versus being the invaders. But don't get me
Right.
started.
Yeah.
But at the same time, most people in the military, and my wife's a veteran too. She was in the Air Force. Most
Oh, wow.
people, they're just doing their jobs. They're doing different
Exactly.
jobs, whether it's
Yeah.
people that are in like law enforcement, or they're in logistics or medical fields, etc. It's like anything else. It's a big community of people who are, they're trying to do the best they can. And just
Hmm.
that's one thing I'm learning too, because I mean, I was in a down and out person, the kind of person that a lot of people would walk on the other side of the street if they saw me, because I was in my worst times there. But out of those worst times, good things can happen. God can reach down, when you're like the quote, for me, I was like dead dog laying on the road of life. And that
Yeah.
light of grace can come down and lift you up. And God's, merciful. And it's like the sinner, and the publican, or whatever, or the publican and the Pharisee,
Exactly.
yeah, or the prodigal son. All these stories, in the Bible, especially in the gospel, stories, parables, etc.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so many moving stories. And then just, I mean, even the real people, going all the way back to, Abraham, just stepping out in faith. God said do
Hmm.
this, and you just do it, and knowing and believing that God's going to raise, your son up, or he's going to like take care of you, he's going to give you whatever, you need. And even if you
Yeah.
make mistakes, like, David, our king, or the king of Jerusalem at the
Yeah.
time did, he did some terrible things. But
Exactly.
those people, you know that he was with, Bathsheba, etc., that's the mother of Solomon, King Solomon,
Exactly.
and he made
John,
mistakes.
I hate to cut you
Anyway,
off because you're doing
we're at
so
the end.
amazing, but we got 20 seconds left and I just want to give you a good farewell. And
Okay,
I want to say thank you so much for coming onto the show. I just want to say this before it's because it's
I
going to cut
appreciate
off the
it.
stream, but we got
Thanks
10
so much.
seconds. Thank you so much for coming on, John. We're going to put some links in the description below so you guys can access all the things he was talking about and his books as well. God bless everybody. And I think it just cut off right there. We just hit the
All right.
two hour mark. But thank you so
Okay.
much, John. I hate to try to wrap it up so quick, but
No, I
I
get it.
was
I knew it was 2 hours.
yeah.
I was thinking, I don't think I can go 2 hours, but
That went quick. No, that was a great interview. I
I
think
can
people
kind
are
of
really going to
wind it.
enjoy that.
Okay, well, I hope so, and I appreciate your hard work and all your efforts.